Hello everyone, and welcome to another amazing story. What if Izuku was in Konosuba? This amazing story was written by Magnus9284. Please support them. Don't forget to like, sub and leave a comment. Now let's dive in. Chapter 18. A Sad Farewell. At the gates of Axel, a party of adventurers was in the middle of a somber conversation. The sunset would happen soon, and the wind was starting to become cold. "I'm sorry," Darkness muttered while shaking like a leaf in the wind. Lady Lalatina Dustiness Ford was allowed to work as an adventurer by her father. As an adventurer, she had a lot of freedom that her noble heritage barred from her. She could have friends, explore dungeons, and get into dangerous situations as long as she was within arm's reach of her family. However, she could never escape her duties as a noble. When she went to say her farewells to her father, he didn't take it lightly. Marching to the front lines was something she was immediately forbidden from doing. While she was allowed to risk her life as long as her body could be recovered, as resurrection magic was something her family could afford, dying on the front lines usually meant no resurrection, thus, no returning. Lord Dustiness Ford had used his only viable card. He threatened her with taking Izuku's life, and the lives of her newly discovered family, if she went missing. "Please forgive me." Ila bowed while hugging her Bianca, less in a protective way, and more like saying goodbye. Right now, the ranger wished she hadn't opened the letter she got today. It was an answer from home, and it had gone wrong in every possible way. Her parents were now on their way to Axel, to meet her beloved leader, and to try to marry him into the family. She would admit that the idea of marrying her party leader was nothing to run away from, but the intent behind her parents' idea was what gave her pause. They wanted to use Izuku's success to advance their agenda as nobles, to gain prestige and power. Of course, this meant that the inheritance order would have to shift to accommodate the new addition to the family. Not only would Izuku be forcibly transformed into a political pawn, she'd also screw up her brother's livelihoods. Also, the mental image of Megumin erasing her entire family, and most likely entire territory, was no less of an incentive to foil such a plan. She had no choice but to await her parents' arrival. Izuku didn't. "There is nothing to be sorry about." Izuku answered to Darkness, and then he turned to Ila, "And there is nothing to forgive. You have your reasons, and I respect that." Both girls had given a short explanation, neither wanting to go into detail. Darkness didn't want to shame herself before her saint, to show how she was still bound by her family, unable to follow the holy figure she desired so much. Ila couldn't bring herself to reveal her noble status, refusing to entangle her leader in the machinations of her family. They weren't expecting to be hugged by the Emerald Archdruid, much less for the kindness to feel so painful. It was getting closer to sunset, and their window of opportunity to depart was closing. In another time, in another world, Izuku would have waited until their situations were resolved, until they were ready to accompany him. "I'll be waiting for you in the next city, in Rogard, as we planned," Izuku explained, showing his unwillingness to stay in Axel any longer. "I'll wait for you until the start of spring." With that said, both noble girls broke into tears. As they watched Izuku turn around to take the reins of the carriage, the Crusader and the Ranger couldn't help but feel as if they had made the worst decision of their lives. It wasn't as if the party had been disbanded, more like they had abandoned it. Worse still, Izuku hadn't confiscated their gear, which made them feel even guiltier. Their eyes blinded by tears, both girls missed Chika and Yunyun tactlessly waving goodbye as the carriage was dragged away by a stomping behemoth. Izuku, though, had no chance to wallow in his sadness alone. Megumin had tactfully chosen to sit by his side. "Are you all right?" Megumin asked, leaning on her boyfriend's shoulder. "No." Izuku replied with honesty, "I'm going to miss them." Taking a minute to remember all the adventures, and misadventures, they'd had with Darkness and Ila, he came to a sad conclusion. Without them, this trip is going to feel low. "Izuku!" A group of voices screaming his name forced Izuku and Megumin to turn around, even though the behemoth hardly slowed down. Dust and his party were running after them. "We are going to help you in your travels," Dust shouted as he and his group got closer to the still-moving carriage. Izuku was going to miss his party members, but maybe the trip wouldn't be as lonely as he thought? A couple of hours later, well into the night, a single carriage moved at a steady pace. Lanterns at every corner of the roof were shedding emerald light, and only the sounds of the beast pulling it were filling the otherwise empty night. Stomp! 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 It was a loud sound? "That isn't a golem," Lin muttered, lightly trembling while stealing glances at the plant creature diligently pulling the carriage. "That is alive, and has a will of its own." The three guys didn't even try to reply. They could only understand that the behemoth was created by the Archdruid. The impossibility of such a feat had been poorly covered by the fact that it was Izuku, and their brains couldn't comprehend more than that. "Maybe you should take a nap?" Dust suggested while patting his own thigh, offering it as an impromptu pillow. I know it's not as high class as the interior of the carriage, but... Lin simply accepted the proposal, mind too numb to even feel shame in front of the other two guys. Of course out here isn't as comfortable as the inside. I've seen expensive rooms less comfortable than this carriage. The group had been able to see the interior when Izuku offered Lin a place inside. While the guys had been awed by the sight of cushioned seats, a clean floor, and the most spotless ceiling they had seen in their entire lives, Lin had been horrified at the thought of being inside of what she considered a harem room. She had been a nervous wreck while declining the offer, for all the wrong reasons. Stomp, stomp, stomp. At least we don't have to hear anything besides the behemoth, right? Dust playfully asked, earning groans from the rest of his party. They had managed to join Izuku, but now felt that their already diminished pride was being trampled. The beast of myth pulling the carriage was a better deterrent against attackers than they would ever be. They couldn't even offer their help to take the reins either, because the behemoth was not something they could steer, no matter how much they actually tried. The idea of being actually trampled into nothingness by a behemoth who might take offense to simple mortals trying to steer it was something that would never leave their minds either. How does one steer a behemoth? Keith asked to no one in particular. I guess you need to be Izuku to do so? Taylor supplied, giving the only explanation that made sense. They could already imagine Izuku actually putting an end to the war, and them getting a small mention as footnotes in the history books as the lowly servants that carried his luggage. Inside the carriage? It was a mess. Izuku couldn't help but to look back at the day, at how his plans failed to come to fruition. Two important members of his team had to drop out of the mission, and he knew that no one was at fault but himself. I should have seen this coming, Izuku thought as he caressed the hair of his girlfriend. Izuku knew that his plan, from the standpoint of view of this world's denizens, seemed suicidal. The war had been going on for what seemed like forever. Those who went to the front lines were brutally murdered to the point that their souls didn't want to return. Anyone would see his mission as pure folly, as something better left to the king and his men. But the king and his men hadn't been able to make any kind of advancement in the war effort. The goddesses had been unable to find a proper hero. Something had to be done, and if he wanted to go back home, he would have to be the one to do so. A bit of rustling distracted the arch-druid for a second. Chika had shifted slightly, stretching her wing to cover the couple's bodies better. I'll be sure to protect you all. Izuku thought as his heart flipped in happiness at being loved so much. I won't allow any of you to get hurt. Izuku had studied a bit about the actual war, and had noticed something that he should have taken into account long ago. No one had any common sense. The front lines of the war consisted of the king's men fighting against the hordes of the Devil King. However, that statement was an embellished way to say that both sides were holding their side of the frontier, watching the other like hawks to stop an invasion en masse. The actual fighting was being done by incursion teams consisting of one strong leader and their party of supporting characters. It was like the video games he faintly remembered, where the player took on the role of the hero and their followers filled archetypical roles. Video game logic belonged to the video game realm. The real world needed a realistic approach. Incredible, Yunyun muttered, laying on the other couch. She was thankfully using it as a bed, her legs up and away from Izuku's view. If this is true. I see, so this is what makes reality real. Yunyun's rambling assaulted Izuku with nostalgia. She reminded him of his old self. At least now he kept the rambling to isolated rooms and to moments where only his party members could hear him. Megumin loved to hear him ramble though. She'd also made it her mission to record his otherworldly wisdom on whatever paper was available. Izuku knew he needed to scout the situation first and gather data on the enemy forces. Once that information was compiled, he could construct a plan for a decisive strike that would bring as little risk as possible. With what little he knew of the barrier and the castle, the only plan he had right now was to gather the Crimson Demons and have them bombard the Devil King's castle with a barrage of big bangs. Unfortunately, such a decision would mean the doom of any slave and captive inside. Izuku hated the idea of making sacrifices for the greater good. Fluffy, so, Fluffy. The voice above Yunyun sounded like someone having a vivid dream. Gimme, Lemmy. Izuku smiled at the scene. Wiz was currently sleeping on the net designed to hold cargo. It didn't look anywhere near as comfortable as the couches, but her new instincts demanded a place above ground. Her new senses also demanded food, sleep and other bodily functions, things that the newly reincarnated Avariel had forgotten about during her tenure as a lich. It had been rather endearing how she gorged on the light meal they had consumed, how she screamed about how delicious all of it was. Then she got scared about the feeling of losing consciousness, and entered a state of childlike glee upon discovering that she was going to be able to actually sleep and dream. She failed to understand her new body though, and ended nearly passing out in exhaustion, much to Chika's relief. Below the verdunet's feet, a mass of muscle and scales shifted ever so slightly, reminding Izuku that he was still struggling to kick out the slave mentality from his beloved girls. When the couch proved too small for Liza to serve as additional cushioning, she took to the floor in a desire to serve as a footrest for her beloved master. Izuku protested, he really did, but the sad eyes of the albino gator girl won out in the end. Now he had to go through the humiliation of resting his feet on the body of a girl. It was hard to think of himself as a hero in such a position. He doubted that anything short of a metric ton of metal could prove uncomfortable for Liza, though. The carriage continued moving into the night, the rhythmic stomping, muffled by the thick walls, was a welcome lullaby to those inside. While the sadness still lingered, Izuku still felt his resolve taking root. He had finally moved from the starting line. New allies would join his party along the way, with some unable to stay until the very end, but he understood that his goal was too high for most people. His most important people were going to stay by his side until the end though, and that fact gave him strength. Knowing that they wanted to stay with him beyond that end goal gave him hope though. Even if he were forced to abandon the powers he had gained to keep his precious people, he'd keep advancing. Yesterday was left behind, just like the town of beginners. Izuku closed his eyes and surrendered to sleep as he understood that tomorrow would illuminate a new path to the future. Or so he hoped. The next day? Halfway to Rogard, in the middle of the road, a troublesome scene was taking place. A large and beautiful carriage was being assaulted by highwaymen. Around a dozen men, each sporting different types of armor and weapons of varying quality, were laying siege to their victims. The scene was stark, but it didn't look like a normal robbery. All over the path were bodies and lots of blood. One female knight was holding her shield high, defiance written on her features, while her two fellow soldiers were lying on the ground in pools of their own blood. However, the dozen bandits seemed slightly hesitant, if still leering at the woman before them. A dozen of their companions, most of them cut to pieces, littered the ground between them and the last standing resistance. "Give up, cunt!" The leader of the bandits shouted, "Surrender and we'll let you live. After taking turns with your body anyway." There were no cheers or follow-ups. The rest of the bandits might have been scum, but they hadn't stayed alive this long by throwing themselves into obvious danger. The knight didn't answer, instead taking a ready stance. The first to step forward would be cut in half. And even if it meant giving up her life, these bastards would never get to lay their eyes on the precious cargo inside the carriage. Just a little longer. The knight thought, a patrol should show up any minute now. According to the ruling noble of this area, there were regular patrols along the path. Also, according to the same noble, there were no bandits prowling said path. If such noble lied in the report, then executions would be in order, assuming someone survived to make the report to the capital, that is. "The spell is ready." A hooded man shouted, "I'm putting her to sleep. Don't forget to bind her before starting any fun." Now the bandits cheered, both in relief and lust. The knight was about to panic, half of her mind screaming that interrupting the spell was vital to avoid defeat, and yet the rest reminded her that her cargo couldn't be exposed to danger upon changing her position. She could only pray for a hero to arrive. Stomp, stomp, stomp. The loud sound was accompanied with rhythmic tremors. Every living person present turned toward the source, knowing very well that such sounds belonged to a massive creature, the kind that would no doubt eat them all and then continue to trample some random city's walls. They didn't expect to see a carriage being pulled by a small behemoth? What the actual F? Twack! An arrow impacted the skull of the bandit, killing him in an instant. His demise was enough to make all the others lose their composure completely. "Nice shot!" Dust exclaimed from atop the carriage, his praise seconded by Lin. "I was actually aiming at the one who looked like the boss though," Keith muttered as he nooked a second arrow. At the reins, Izuku made his best effort to ignore the archer's confession, and repressed the nausea from seeing someone die in front of him, again. "Protect the people," Izuku commanded, finding it hard to swallow how the other adventurers followed his command, and how likely they were going to kill the bandits as a result. Anything else is secondary. The Emerald Archdruid wished that the bandits would run away. A couple of minutes later, it had been a total victory, so one-sided that it was more like a massacre. Much to his dismay, Izuku Midoriya felt like all that blood was on his hands. Why didn't they run away? Why didn't they try to surrender, to beg for their lives? It was inhumane, but Izuku remembered why this was a common occurrence. There was no prison for bandits, only death. There were no human rights for those who decided to live outside the laws of the kingdoms. Rather than having their belongings being sent to their families, their bodies were being looted by the adventurers that had killed them. Seeing Dust and his party, even the sweet and caring Lin, strip the bodies of the outlaws like it was expected of them was making Izuku's stomach churn. Adventurers! The female knight called to the group, "I request that you stop what you are doing." Finally, Izuku muttered, still sitting on the carriage, not wanting to have anything to do with the disgraceful show of inhumanity unfolding. "Someone sends. I need you to take us to Axel at once." The knight stated in a firm voice, "You'll be handsomely compensated for this service, and I will add a bonus to compensate for setting aside your looting rights." "What?" Izuku couldn't help his shout. Was it too much to ask for some humanitarian sensitivity? "Why?" The knight looked ready to explode with indignation, as if taking offense, but immediately controlled herself. "My lady is being afflicted by some severe ailment. No one knows if it is a curse or some other form of malediction, and I fear she may not have enough time." The knight explained, obviously pained. "Her only hope is to take her to the town of Axel, where a sage has been sighted, someone said to be able to deal with any sort of affliction." "I see," Izuku replied with a heavy voice. "Curses, afflictions of unknown origin and a sage. That had to be Kiel?" Izuku wanted to say no. This wasn't his responsibility. He actually hated how inhumane the people of this world acted. But, looking at their carriage, he knew that there was no repairing it. The bandits had done quite the number on it, not only destroying the wheels with magic, but breaking the entire undercarriage as well. Even complaining about using the lethal force felt wrong after seeing the other two guys dead on the ground. They had given their lives to protect whoever was inside, and leaving her to her own fate felt like disrespecting the dead. "What about your dead comrades?" Izuku asked, still hesitant to accept the request. Saving this one life would set him back, and not just for a few days. Winter was coming, meaning that he'd be stuck back in Axel for months. They knew the risks and... The knight started with a solemn voice. "I can revive them." Just to be interrupted by a girly voice. A young girl exited the wrecked carriage, sporting blonde hair and a blue nun habit. "Just give me 10 minutes. The nun continued as she approached the fallen soldiers. "You need that time to move the sick lady anyway." "Understood." The knight replied and then moved to the carriage to assist the individual within. Izuku felt immediately annoyed by the attitude. This knight had decided on her own that they were entitled to his carriage, that he had no right to deny them. If he were to be honest, this world wasn't exactly deserving of his every kindness. Truth be told, the life of a single noblewoman would be insignificant when weighed against all the lives that would be lost on the front lines if he had to return to Axel and forced to spend the winter there. He got ready to explain his point to the knight. He got ready to order his new friend to resume the march to the next city. "Hold still, milady," the knight said to the rather petite girl in her arms, only part of her blonde hair visible due to the cloth enveloping her. "We'll make it in time. I swear upon my life." Then Izuku saw the face of the girl. The cold sweat, the pain. Megumin and Liza had been by his sides the entire time, silent observers to the whole ordeal. And now, Megumin had a resigned smile on her face. She knew exactly what was going to happen. "Megumin, get inside and arrange for one of the couches to be cleared for the girl," Izuku requested, sounding resigned and yet sporting an apologetic smile. "Guys, move the luggage so the revived soldiers can ride up there with you." There was a sense of satisfaction at seeing his orders being carried out without hesitation. It really felt good to be listened to, one of the few good perks of coming to this world. As Megumin entered the carriage to ensure there would be enough room, Izuku turned to his faithful companion. "Liza, can you help that knight with the girl?" Izuku's request was immediately answered with a nod and a grunt from the albino gator girl. "Be gentle." Izuku's warning came with an odd sense of urgency, something the female knight didn't fail to notice. The woman looked tired, her rather slow pacing an obvious sign that fighting the bandits took a lot out of her. "I carry," Liza said as she reached her target. The knight frowned at the sight of the slave before her. Her self-restraint was made obvious as she bit back curse words, obviously aware that she needed the help of the boy with the carriage, and that she had no strength left to force him to cooperate. "There is no way I will surrender her to you." The knight spat with as much politeness as she could. "There is no way a brute like you would treat my lady with the required kindness." A cherished slave was still a slave. A slave trained for heavy lifting would treat the noble in her hands just like any piece of luggage. Slaves were slaves for a reason, and their reliability would not change no matter how well trained and cherished they were. The knight had come to this conclusion while seeing the albino lizard woman approaching, clad in armor while looking clean and well fed. Both a worker and sex toy, no doubt. Liza didn't even stop when she reached the pair. She didn't acknowledge the voice, the defiance, or anything really. She simply understood that the armored human wasn't going to let go of the sick human. She still needed to bring the sick human into the carriage though. She went for the easiest solution. "What the hell are you doing?" She lifted both the armored lady and the sick girl into her arms. "How? Why?" She even walked faster than the knight could when not carrying anything at all, reaching the carriage in no time. For the albino gator girl, there was no difference between carrying 1, 2, or a dozen of anything. Her master wanted them inside the carriage, so she'd take them there. Applying brute force was the easiest way for her to solve problems in life, after all. Remember me to never get on her bad side, Taylor muttered while watching the scene. The knight had heavier gear than him, and Liza didn't give a single fuck about it. Does she have a good side? Keith muttered, besides whatever side she shows to Izuku. Gatorkin are scary. Dust just shuddered while remembering how Liza had nearly killed him, with a glancing blow. Lin didn't comment. Izuku was equally kind and scary, trying to split hairs was pointless. Suddenly, a black harpy landed on the roof of the carriage. Chika saw no more baddies nearby. The black harpy reported, causing the mediocre adventurers to wince, "Master got new friends?" The albino gator girl was intimidating, and the adventurers accepted that she would probably tear them apart with zero effort if they ever offended Izuku, but at least her mere existence didn't hurt them. Chika hurt them every time she spoke. The black harpy could also hurt monsters with her mere voice. And Izuku had her around all day and night? In the rider's seat, Izuku sighed. He was defeated yet again by his need to save people. The girl was suffering, and she was not responsible for the problems plaguing him. Sacrifices were unacceptable, at least that's what his heart told him. Sacrificing her for the sake of his mission would be not only hypocritical, but inhumane. If he were to be honest, he would admit that if he had decided to leave them behind, he would have turned back to help them within 5 minutes. "Master, okay?" Liza asked as she resumed her preferred position by his side. Izuku sighed in defeat. "Don't worry, it's just a case of Izuku being Izuku, despite his best efforts to be different." Megumin replied as she took her seat yet again. "It's just..." Izuku trailed off, seeking something, anything to blame. "I'm tired of things not going as they should be. Crossing the gates of Axel was going to be exceedingly embarrassing now, rescue of a noble or not." "Master is feeling down?" Chika asked, and then smiled as she got a bright idea. "Chika knows how to make Master feel better." Izuku blinked in confusion. He quickly panicked as the petite avian girl guided Megumin to change seats, or rather, guided her to sit on his lap. Both teens blushed for a moment. "D does this." Megumin stammered a little, but quickly began to lean onto her boyfriend. "Help?" "It." Izuku stammered too, but then hugged his girlfriend. "Does." Basking in the warmth of the petite crimson demon truly helped to soothe the nerves of the arch-druid. The contact felt natural, and while their romance was not as intense as they had seen with a few couples in Axel, it was slowly escalating in how comfortable they were getting in public. "We are ready up here," the nun called from atop the carriage. One look at the two soldiers was more than enough to understand that the priest had used raise the dead, and not resurrection. The poor guys were going through revivification sickness, their stats lowered and their senses muddled until they had a chance for a proper rest. A small window behind Izuku slid open. "Everything's ready inside too," Yunyun reported with a tone of satisfaction, as if fulfilling some sort of duty, "although I wish that the night lady would stop acting as if we were kidnappers. She can get out if she doesn't like it there." Megumin bit back on Izuku's behalf, taking offense at such attitude. "I apologize." The knight quickly retorted, "I humbly accept your aid in this endeavor. So, please, let's start moving." The woman didn't sound apologetic or humble, but Izuku knew that making the girl suffer more than strictly necessary was not the right answer. "All right then," Izuku finally said, and then directed his voice to the friend he had created. "Let's go back to Axel, Como." The name that was chosen for the behemoth was that, Como. Chika said it was cute. Liza said it was small. Yunyun called it adorable. Seeing that the consensus was that if the creature didn't mind the name as long as it got it, he went for a combination of small and cute in Japanese. Because he knew a certain explosive blonde would probably get an aneurysm if he ever caught wind of such a thing. Stomp, 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 and thus, the carriage turned around, and began its trek back to the town of beginners. This time faster than before, but still at a peaceful pace. Behind a tree overlooking the scene, Chris sighed in relief. The hero would return to Axel, meaning more opportunities to reach out to the beloved of Ariel. "At least I didn't have to intervene," Chris muttered, turning to look at the corpse below her. Too much. Following that carriage had been a nightmare. The beast Izuku created was more than just a mindless golem or a primitive awakened bush. It had intelligence, malevolent intelligence even. Whenever she got even a little close, it turned its head as if to search for her, and she was pretty damn sure it didn't want to cuddle up to her. Finding these people had been a sort of a blessing, really. She knew the boy was too soft for his own good, that there was no way for him to not take in the injured and the sick before delivering them back to town. Of course, she wasn't going to stay idle either. That group of bandits was larger than what it seemed at first. They had a sentry ready to run back to their main hideout to gather reinforcements if things turned ugly. Slitting the throat of said sentry had been an easy way to support the archdruid, even though she couldn't boast about the feat. Now back to Axel. Chris muttered with unsettling happiness, time to worm my way into that party, and into the heart of the beloved. Winter was coming, and the thief knew all too well that Izuku would not move during that time. Being so soft-hearted was the most exploitable of his weaknesses. Omake, a dark omen. In the bowels of the Devil King's castle, inside a sealed chamber only a handful of people could enter, a shadowed figure looked upon a lone pedestal. This isn't good. On the lone pedestal, a small crystal box was being displayed. The contents of the box, visible to anyone, was a small vial with a bright crimson fluid, or at least it should be so. This isn't good at all. The vial was broken, having shattered completely. The liquid no longer the vibrant crimson it was supposed to be, but a viscous black mess. It was the remnants of a phylactery, one that showed that the powerful undead it belonged to had been slain in a way that unraveled the magical bond that shackled their soul to the world. Well played, Wiz. Well played indeed. The shattered phylactery belonged to the Ice Witch, the ridiculously powerful lich that shouldered half of the power of the barrier that protected his castle. The way it had shattered meant that the pact had been fulfilled, that she had done her job, that her soul had been forfeited and, in the process, she had finally saved her friends. You ended it on your own terms then. You earned your freedom, and I hope you found it worth it in the end. While there was no resentment in the voice, there was an obvious undertone of stress. The barrier would still hold strong against common means of attack, but now any relic weapon would be able to breach it. Heck, even a really powerful explosion spell could do it at this point. Replacing Wiz was out of question. There was no way someone as powerful would ever knock on his door and make such a pact as Wiz did. Improvisation was in order. Exiting the hidden chamber, the Devil King turned to look at two servants. You. The Devil King called to the first servant, a Demoness, gather all the spellcasters we have at hand and shift the power of the barrier to the outer layer. We need to at least make it look strong enough to discourage potential heroes. The Demoness nodded and darted away to fulfill her duties. Word of two potential heroes had spread like wildfire in the castle, and she sure as hell she didn't want to face them, especially the one that destroyed Beldia. And you. The Devil King turned to the other one, a woman with draconic features, call all the generals. We need to reorganize the army, and delegate functions until we find proper replacements for our fallen comrades. About that, sir. The draconic girl was exceedingly hesitant in her voice. What? The Devil King was getting a bad feeling out of this. Vanir, Hans and Wolbachar. The draconic girl took a couple of steps back, gone, on a vacation? I think. A moment of silence filled the hallway as the words sunk in. What? And so, the Devil King cursed the very heavens for gifting him with such a band of incompetent idiots. Omake, a cry for help. There were things that were universal, like how gossip and rumors traveled at speeds faster than light, or how they reached the furthest corners of the world like wildfire in a dry forest. Hey, did you hear about the Axis cult in Axel? That they stole from a noble, right? I knew those weirdos were also thieves. In a world with magic, rumors and gossip were carried by magical means. And when such means were backed up by institutions like the Adventurers Guild, they stopped being rumors and gossip, and instead became the truth. Can't say I'm surprised. They always seemed suspicious to me. I heard they evaded taxes too. No wonder they were kicked out of their church. For one fallen goddess, those words were as hurtful as being stabbed with rusty swords. She had gone through such humiliation to help them, and now this happened? This can't be right. Aqua muttered as she walked to the inn she was staying at. My cute worshippers couldn't have done such a horrendous thing. She had done everything right for her worshippers. She even completed her contract with that nerd. Thinking that her own followers would commit such a travesty was something she couldn't fathom. In her mind, the only explanation was that her cute head priest had been assaulted halfway to the capital, thus, it hadn't been his fault. There was no way her own children would backstab her, right? I heard they lied about the taxes they owed, that they gave false information on purpose to steal from the town and the crown. That's why they stole from a noble? Greedy bastards. Aqua froze in her tracks. If that is what really happened, that meant that the head priest was the rotten apple. Then she remembered that the one who gave the money was Izuku. That softy would no doubt help her again if she pleaded enough. Of course, that meant throwing the bad apple under the bus, and bringing some sort of peace offering, maybe some cute girls? Maybe, some cute slave girls? I say we demand an audit on the Axis Church in this town. If they did that there, they could be doing the same here. I say we kick them out of town right away. Aqua began to run. She had a new mission, to save her cute worshippers. Traveling back to Axel was the priority now. Finding a way to get Izuku to help was going to be her biggest concern. The only saving grace was that Kyuya would be easy to convince. He had been rambling about clearing out the marks on their cards anyway. A couple of minutes later. What? Aqua was getting hysterical. Her request had been denied. Why can't we depart right now? Because there is no money. Kyuya was at the end of his rope. You wasted it all already. Again. Aqua actually had the decency of wincing at that remark. She still shifted the blame to the boy though. He had promised that she would have everything she desired when he asked her to join, but right now, there was no room to argue. It would take a week of work to pay for the tickets to Axel, and that doesn't take into consideration food and shelter. Kyuya further explained, looking as if he was in the middle of a breakdown. Do you understand? We are stranded here until you decide to show some restraint. Aqua pouted while trying to hold back her tears. She was being blamed for everything, and couldn't argue out of fear of being denied of the chance to save her cute worshippers. 1 week? Aqua asked with a timid voice. If you can go without eating, yes. Kyuya replied, still sounding angry, or if you get a part-time job at the market to get food. The swords master had thrown the bait, not really expecting the goddess to bite. I'll do it. Aqua replied with a haunted voice, for my cute worshippers. I'll do it. That week was going to be hell, but both made a silent oath to see it through and return to the place that started all this trouble. Only one of them was plotting to ditch the other though. Chapter 19. Wrath. Moving towards the town of Axel, one carriage was being pulled by what even an illiterate would call a behemoth. The sight of the impressive vehicle and the mythical creature sharply contrasted with the mood of the one holding the reins. Why did this have to happen? Izuku asked to no one in particular, sighing at his luck and his inability to ignore those suffering. Why can't I move forward already? The gates of Axel were visible now, and with each step, the growing dread became more obvious. What was he supposed to say now, after his rather heroic speech when he left? Master, regret? Liza's question carried too much weight for someone who supposedly lacked intellect. For the entirety of a second, Izuku thought about how to answer that question. He wondered what could have happened if he had said no back then, if he had ignored that soul-suffering person in order to continue his quest for the greater good. No. Izuku replied in all honesty, I just wish that hadn't happened. His heart was that of a hero. Even if he wasn't fully aware of that. Then stop feeling down already. Megumin added, admittedly tired of hearing her boyfriend sigh every 15 minutes, what's done is done. Instead, let's take this time to prepare for a longer journey. Izuku smiled at the idea of a better opportunity given. He was grateful of having Megumin and Liza sitting on either side of him the entire trip, even if he loathed the reason behind such a blessing. The night finally revealed her name after night had fallen. Her demands for speeding the pace were met with the sensible request of revealing the identities of everyone interrupting the journey of the owner of their ride. Probably thinking that doing so would increase the speed of the beast, she revealed her name as Claire, and that of her charge as Lady Iris. There was no mention of a house name though. The only explanation given was that her noble lady was traveling incognito to avoid unscrupulous people trying to get a hold of her. The soldiers, Wedge and Biggs, seconded Claire in mentioning how often lesser nobles tried to gain some favor from their charge when her house was revealed, and how insincere officers could get when hearing her actual station. Remembering how Darkness preferred to hide her true identity, Izuku decided to not inquire any further. Claire, though, didn't stop demanding for the carriage to speed up. At least until she noticed that night had fallen, and the beast didn't stop even once, nor did it stop to rest as any horse would do. She stopped her demands altogether when she finally recognized the beast, and the very real fear of being trampled into oblivion by an angry behemoth took root in her mind. Perched upon one of the behemoth's antlers, Chica hummed some incoherent tune. Moving her tail feathers with the senseless rhythm, it made for quite the adorable sight for the verdant archdruid and his entourage. It made him feel elated, to be responsible for some level of happiness from someone who had suffered so much not too long ago. Why does he keep that devil? Biggs, the bigger and rounder of the two soldiers, spoke in a barely lowered voice, feral harpies are the worst. The soldiers belonged to the heiress faith, and thus, they made their dislike of his dear Chica clear as day. Shush Biggs. Wedge, the rather squalid companion, rebuked with poorly maintained neutrality, we are lucky he gave us a ride to the town, so we shouldn't be ungrateful. Besides, he may not even be a believer, it is not our place to try to convince him of their evil ways. Izuku was truly tempted to kick the two from the carriage's roof. Even if they were still weakened by the revivification sickness debuff, the town's gate wasn't too far as to call the action evil. Indeed, it is not your place to judge such things or decry evil that doesn't exist. The final passenger spoke, the blonde priestess with the nun habit. She introduced herself as Cecily, a priestess of the Axis cult, a priestess of Aqua. Just look at such love and acceptance. The way he accepts everyone regardless of race or status. Cecily began to speak with a certain zeal. If he hadn't clarified it already, I would say he is the perfect follower of the all-loving Aqua. As the priestess continued her ramblings and show of devotion, Izuku repeatedly told himself that just because this girl worshipped Aqua, she wasn't evil. At least she only pestered him thrice about joining her cult before taking the hint and leaving him alone. Now at the break of dawn, and getting ever closer to the town's gate, Izuku took the end of the journey as a blessing. The group that had forced their way into his carriage, interrupted his mission, and acted rather rudely against his friends would be finally left behind, and he'd be free to search for a place to hole up for the winter. He pitied the sage they were looking for though. He certainly wished his hunch was wrong, and that poor Keel wouldn't be the one to have to deal with them. The sliding window behind the driver's seat opened up, revealing the gaze of his second Crimson Demon companion. Izuku, Izuku! Yun sang with an odd level of excitement, whiz, and I have finally put together the symptoms of the malediction. Izuku couldn't help but smile at the enthusiasm of the Crimson Demon. He hated to admit it, but he found her cheerful disposition charming. Then he remembered why this little advancement could happen in the first place. As a worshipper of Eris, Claire saw Wiz as an omen of good fortune, and her offer to help as a helping hand from who she called a benevolent goddess. At least Wiz hated the idea as much as him. Good. Izuku replied good-naturedly. What did you find? Izuku held no hopes of being able to diagnose the illness as the knight had vehemently stated that her lady had protection against curses and poisons, after all. Still, if there was an illness that they had overlooked, and he was able to at least alleviate the symptoms. She has been having difficulty keeping food in her stomach for a couple of days, which probably led to her weakened state. Yun started her report in her usual happy tone, making it sound odd for such a time. To make things worse, it seems she has been bleeding when she goes to the restroom. Izuku frowned. In the corner of his mind, something was telling him that he had heard those symptoms before. Then again, a lot of illnesses had those, including poisoning. Then there are these weird bluish-grayish patches of skin that. Yun continued, and then Izuku's brain called for something he shouldn't overlook, a common symptom that could, and would get in the way of everything. What? Izuku was at the end of his rope. His mind had come up with an answer that he really didn't want to consider, but he needed to make sure. Stop. As his uncharacteristic yell, the behemoth stopped, almost making the guards and adventurers fall from the roof of the carriage. Cecily went face-first into Lin's chest though. Why are we st? Claire tried to demand an explanation as to why the vehicle had stopped, to demand to be taken to the town post-haste. Does she go into random fits of anger? Izuku asked in a rather angry voice, surprising even Megumin, fits that she then forgets about? There was a heavy silence as those accompanying the blonde noble were shocked. That's right. Wiz suddenly spoke, only a bit of her face appearing on the small window. How? Claire could barely find her voice. How could you know the signs of this strange malediction? Izuku wanted to explode. These people had mistaken poisoning for poison, and a sickness for a curse. There was a voice in the druid's head, telling him to bring judgment unto all the idiots in this world. The other voice, his hero dreams, his good heart and the love instilled in him by his dear mother, reminded him that this world's knowledge was medieval at best. Taking a deep breath, Izuku convinced himself that, for once, the people of this world had no way to know the differences between the afflictions. That is heavy metal poisoning. Izuku replied with a rather stiff voice. Coming down from his seat at the reins, he moved to the door of the carriage, earning the questioning stares from the entire group. That's impossible. Claire retorted, although she didn't make any effort to stop the Verdunette, who, in her eyes, seemed to know what he was talking about. As I explained before, my lady can't be Heavy metal poisoning is not the same as being afflicted by poison. Izuku replied, still rather stiff, as he opened the door and entered the carriage. Rather than only binding to nerves and blood, heavy metals tear apart tissue, organs, and take the place of important nutrients. They can't be digested. Neither Claire or the soldiers risked questions or retorts. For all they understood, the Verdunette was speaking magical language. Dust's party, however, decided that attempting to even understand the words would make their heads explode. Lin may have understood that Izuku had explained something exceedingly important, but the details went way over her head. Wait. Megumin entered the conversation. If that's true, then half of the curses could be the result of heavy metals entering the bodies of dungeon delvers? Rather than answering Megumin's question, or rather, asking what the heck she was talking about, Izuku requested Claire to uncover the noble lady. Claire was somewhat reticent, but a sudden idea had entered her mind now that the malediction had been seemingly identified. But how does something like heavy metal enter the body? Yun asked, wondering how something so big could stay inside someone. Maybe an arrowhead that couldn't be removed? Eating a coin? Wiz joined the pondering, still nested on the cargo net. My lady has never been injured in such a way as to leave a shard of metal in her body, and she is not a crude commoner to attempt to eat something like a coin. Claire clarified as she helped the young blonde to sit in the couch, but I can't discard the idea of some evil witch trying to teleport something like that into her body. Izuku was about to start asking specific questions, when he noticed something tucked in the bag beside the noble lady. Some sort of flask filled with tiny golden balls, so tiny they could be easily swallowed. Medieval stupidity indeed. What is this? Izuku asked as he reached for the flask, holding it up for everyone to see. That's a new medicine that is going to hit the market in the capital. Claire replied with ease, knowing very well that no one could know what it was, and thus asking was natural. The alchemist assured us that it would help my lady with her constant cravings, and would also help in keeping. Izuku had enough. He had enough of the stupidity of this world full of morons, idiots, and greedy bastards who wouldn't mind destroying lives for a gold coin. He reminded himself that these morons had medieval level of knowledge, and that ignorance was a thing. This is gold. Izuku interrupted, his voice nearly reaching hysterical levels. Gold is a heavy metal. Izuku really wanted to tear into the group, to unleash a verbal beatdown of biblical proportions, but then again, he had to remember that most likely these idiots honestly thought that ingesting gold was a safe practice. He was still too angry to try to tone down the verbal lashing, so he decided to do the right thing and help the suffering girl. Forget it. Izuku muttered to a still reeling audience. Even his companions had flinched at his tone. Now I know how to help her. At such words, Claire showed a bright smile, which then disappeared as she noticed vines growing out from below the adventurer's sleeves. Then she saw them grow thorns, or rather, thin needles. What are you? Claire began to ask for details. As much as she wanted her lady to be saved, what the archdruid was doing looked more dangerous than not. Don't interrupt me. Izuku deadpanned, while still creating a knot with the vines, giving the impression of a heart. Removing heavy metals from a human body required specialized treatment with advanced tools and reagents. While this world was ages behind in medical technology, his knowledge and his skill set gave him an option to deal with this particular problem. Organic needles existed in the natural world, grown on plants and insects to inject toxins. Thanks to his plant modification capabilities, he could recreate them to serve as 4 needles. Recreating an isotonic fluid dedicated to bind the gold and not affect the body of his patient was tricky, but that only required focus. The pump system was what forced his concentration though. Recreating a heart with his vines had been a delicate process, but matching the pump's rhythm with the heart of the patient was going to require every bit of his concentration. What are you doing? Claire asked in obvious alarm. She had expected some sort of spell or ritual, not this weird plant thing about to latch into her lady. Then she saw the vines, with the thin thorns, latch into the arms of her charge. Hey! What do you think? Why? Get her out. Izuku commanded, knowing he couldn't risk any sort of distraction at the moment. Liza obeyed instantly. Out. The albino gator girl stated while taking a hold of the knight's arm. Unhand me you br. Claire tried to call on her station and rank, just to be unceremoniously thrown out of the carriage. Ugh. The knight grunted as she hit the ground. She would concede that the brute of a slave was strong and loyal, but this wasn't the way to handle nobility. Trying to turn to peek inside the carriage to ascertain the safety of her lady, the only thing she found was an albino gator girl standing tall and steadfast. It was obvious that she wouldn't move out of the way even if it meant forfeiting her life, just as it was obvious that the brute didn't even acknowledge her status. It was possible to see inside the carriage though. First, the sap goes in, and the blood comes out. Izuku described the process in a simplified way, mostly to keep proper focus and not rush things out. The heartbeat must remain in synchrony, neither faster or slower. The organ made of vines did beat like a heart, pushing the purifying sap into the veins of the blonde noble girl, while taking her blood into the filters, where the heavy metal would be retained before returning the blood to her body. Everyone looking was mesmerized by the process. If they didn't know better, Megumin and Yun would have screamed at seeing a new spell being created, but they knew about synergies, Izuku's unique wisdom. Wiz, less used to witnessing the impossible on a regular basis, was trying to get as close as possible without interfering. Outside the carriage, Claire could only bite her lip at the scene. Whatever the boy was doing, couldn't be interrupted without risking the life of her lady. There we go! Izuku cheered after a surprisingly small amount of time. That's all the gold that was poisoning her. In the hands of the archdruid, the heart made of vines was now a shriveled mess, looking almost like rotten fruit. The gold is. Biggs, who looked down from the roof, began to ask, inside that thing? You can take it if you want it. Izuku replied while throwing the dead plant toward the roof, it's probably a gram or less. Good luck extracting it. A what? Claire was confused, forgetting the names of measuring could be forgiven due to the shock. Anyway, is my lady safe? Almost. Izuku replied, and then turned to look at the roof again. Miss Cecily, can you please cast healing magic on the lady? I'm rather tired, and can't keep up with the job. A job well done. One less person suffering, and no true risks taken. It may have resulted in missing the window to reach the next town, but at least his conscience wouldn't be torturing him. He didn't know who was the sage they were looking for, but imagining that this individual couldn't ask a king's ransom for some obscure treatment was N. Could it be? Claire interrupted Izuku's train of thought with a relaxed face full of surprise, that you are the sage? Midoriya, the sage of Axel? Even though they were still somewhat distant to the town's gate, the guard swore they heard someone curse the heavens and the goddesses with unnerving clarity. An hour later, they would attest that the behemoth crossing said gate had nothing on the angry archdruid holding its reins. They didn't even dare to ask anything, or do anything other than bowing their heads as the carriage entered the town. Later at the guild hall. Entering the town's gate had been embarrassing enough, but then being tackled and hugged by not just one, but two girls upon entering the guild made things worse, especially because said pair had screamed his name with tears in their eyes. He had been really happy to see them again. In fact, he felt as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. And still, Izuku Midoriya, archdruid and someone considered by most as the hero of Axel, was having an honest-to-God meltdown. For those outside his party, it was difficult to tell, as for them he only seemed tired and annoyed, but for those in his party? There. Megumin was patting the back of the emerald archdruid, her eyes betraying how much she actually enjoyed being in no danger whatsoever right now. There is nothing we can do right now. It wasn't your fault. The words of the explosive archwizard were true on so many levels it wasn't even funny. Izuku, being humble by nature, never called himself a sage, nor accepted such a title. A sage was someone with great wisdom and knowledge, someone who could understand greater mysteries and find solutions to delicate problems. A sage was someone who people would go to in order to solve terrible disputes. Not some druid upstart who had only lived in this world for not even a full year. It's okay. Yun joined the back-patting, oblivious to the fact that she was not officially immune to reprisal. There was no way for you to know. We certainly didn't know you had that title. No one knew, actually. Darkness added, taking a sip from her beer while failing to hide her smile, I was certain you'd be known as a saint instead. Izuku didn't know whether to groan or sigh in relief. The title of saint was too much for him to bear. It actually makes sense, you know? Ila joined too, openly smiling at being able to stay with her party leader for a bit longer. She had found a way out of her family problem, but Izuku didn't need more fuel to his rage, being first renowned as a sage, before aiming for the title of saint. Izuku decided to groan. He loved how earnest his companions were, but they were getting too overzealous. Grulu-wow-wool. The rather intimidating sound had all eyes turning, all falling on a certain albino gator girl. Liza merely tilted her head in confusion, although the way she was nursing her belly made it clear that she was about to enter a critical moment for her hibernation. Girls, can I ask you to? Izuku began to make his request, but both Ila and Darkness smiled as they stood up. They understood perfectly, and without any more directions, they left to order the biggest amount of food possible. They also decided to order extra, as Izuku was most likely in need of extra energy. As the duo walked away, Izuku pondered his situation, his predicament and the series of misfortunes that had led to it. Worse than not knowing about holding a title, was the inescapable fact that the rescued group had failed at communicating, well, pretty much everything. He could somewhat understand that asking for the true identity of the rescued noble was perhaps a little too much, as it stood to reason that due to her delicate state, her guardian would be absolutely paranoid and see everyone as a potential enemy. He could understand the reticence at explaining the affliction, as misreporting anything could have been disastrous. But Claire had refused to even mention the name of the sage they were looking for. I'm back. Wiz called as she entered the hall, earning gasps and stares. I tried to explain everything to our guests, but... Izuku hated the staring. While he understood that seeing an Avarial would always be awe-inspiring for the followers of Eris, he couldn't help but notice the greed and lust oozing from some of those eyes. It was hard not to want to gouge them out. She insists on talking to you. Wiz finished, just as Claire stepped forward. Izuku sighed, and with a rather forced polite gesture, he motioned for everyone to sit down at their usual table. He made an effort to sit at an angle that avoided looking at Luna as much as possible. The young woman was swooning at the prospect of him staying, or at least that was the impression she was giving. Master Midoriya, Claire began, just to stop at seeing the face of rejection from the young sage before her, or rather, Mr. Izuku. While she personally believed that commoners were inferior creatures, she respected powerful adventurers, because those, with enough effort, could be knighted and then welcomed into the ranks of nobility. The adventurer Kuya was one such prospect, until the guild marked him. Izuku Midoriya, the sage and hero of Axel, was also a candidate, with a much more prominent record. I want to apologize for all the inconveniences, especially for hindering your campaign against the Devil King. Claire took a solemn tone, showing seriousness on the topic touched. The delay on your quest is unacceptable by any standards, and I understand that no monetary reward will ever compensate for sacrificing your time, but alas, the service you provided demands. Solemn as she sounded, and serious as she was, the knight didn't feel any guilt. Her charge was more important to her than the potential lives lost on the front lines. Keeping her charge's mission and identity a secret was her priority. Her lady had thoroughly scolded her though, and demanded the young archdruid be fully compensated and rewarded. Before any of that, Izuku interrupted, surprising the knight, "How is the young lady?" Claire's semblance softened, pleasantly surprised by the good manners of the young sage. For her, it all but cemented the idea of this boy being of noble blood. It explained both his brilliance and the fact that he had a family name. "She is still weak, but is awake and lucid," Claire answered, happy to report that her lady was already recovering. Then she steeled her features, returning to her duties. "This is your reward, for saving my lady, and for sparing some of your invaluable time." She calmly placed a signet and a neatly folded letter on the table. The way she did so made it seem as if those items were more valuable than her very life. "With these, you will not only be able to recover the 3 days lost of your journey, but will find it much easier to." Claire seemed way too proud to explain the significance of the items. However, the archdruid was not in the mood. "I don't care," Izuku interrupted, making her reel back as if struck. "The window for departure has already closed. Thanks to you, I'll be stuck here the entire winter. Those trinkets will not help me in the slightest." As Izuku retorted, Darkness and Ila arrived with large plates filled with food, mostly fried frog and other types of meat. With a nod toward the albino gator girl, Liza quickly began to gorge on the food. "What?" Claire was in shock, both for the audacity of rejecting such invaluable treasures, and for the declaration, "Why?" It didn't make sense to her. 3 days had been lost, but if he was that worried about winter, he just needed to push his behemoth a little bit harder to reach the next town before the first snow began to fall. Even at the normal pace shown, he would easily arrive before the snow could even start to pile up. Her confusion was so great that she managed to ignore the demi-human eating like a starving pig. She even managed to not show disgust at the harpy taking quick stripes of meat from the albino girl's plate. "I travel with a harpy and a gator girl. One of them is about to enter hibernation, the other is irrationally hated by a large number of religious nutjobs." Izuku opened his explanation in a rather aggressive way. Even the crimson demons by his side were taken aback. "Let's assume I rush towards the next town, and that I arrive the day before the cold winds send Liza into deep sleep. I would have to find an inn ready and willing to let me rent a room for the entire winter. A place able to guarantee that no one would be able to disturb my party." "That shouldn't," Claire tried to retort, but got immediately cut off. "Who is going to guarantee that the inn I choose in a hurry won't allow a bunch of zealots into our room so they can get a hold of Chika?" Izuku asked, now openly glaring at Claire, who never tried to hide her religious standing as part of the heiress faith. "Who will take responsibility if either of my girls is harmed during such a critical time?" Claire went silent for a minute. She needed to think of a way for the sage to take the gifts. She was sure once he looked at them closely, he would understand their importance, both as national treasures and as tools for his crusade. With the signet in hand and the letter at the ready, even the most zealous of the priests would have to bend the knee and accommodate his needs. He would be able to conscript anyone he wanted to, regardless of social standing. Unfortunately, direct communication was impossible without revealing the secret. She then decided to bring up some logical points. "So, what you are telling me is that the slaves are holding you back?" Claire asked as neutrally as she could. "Can't you leave them behind and continue with your crusade? I'm not saying you should abandon them, but leaving them with someone you trust, or selling them to someone worthy." Claire couldn't continue. Before her 3 forces of nature were now standing, ready to unleash a natural disaster that may as well erase the entire town rather than just kill her. Now, of all times, she began to piece together the character of the sage. A demi-lover. Personally, she had nothing against demi-lovers, her lady was one after all. However, she couldn't understand them. What was there to love about inferior races better suited to serve than to live on their own? Enough. Darkness was the first to act, placing a rather heavy hand on Claire's armored shoulder. You have trampled on the patience of my party leader for far too long. You'll leave now, or I'll remove you. Your choice. Under normal circumstances, Claire would have scoffed at the demand, calling on her heritage and lineage. But as arrogant as she may have been, she was aware of her place in the world, and that was beneath Lady Dustiness Ford, the daughter of the Duke. In truth, only her lady had the authority to talk this woman down. In truth, not being recognized by the daughter of the Duke was not surprising in the slightest. Bam! The doors of the guild hall slammed open, interrupting any potential show of violence. The destroyer. The destroyer has been sighted. It's coming here. One of the town's guards entered, screaming at the top of his lungs. For a total of 3 seconds, the entire hall fell into absolute deafening silence. During that time, Izuku remembered the name uttered. He had seen the requests almost every time he and his party had searched for a quest to take. However, due to the difficulty of the task, and the reported distance, he never bothered with it. What is tea? Izuku's question died the instant the 3 seconds passed, as hysterical screaming erupted all around him. In fact, it erupted all around the town. My lady! Claire screamed as she darted toward the door, we need to evacuate. As the entire population descended into hysterical panic, Izuku noticed that some people were still rather calm and collected. Munch. Munch. Crunch. Munch. Or didn't give a single fuck, like Liza. Oh, how terrible. Ela muttered in a deadpan tone, whatever are we going to do? It seemed the ranger wasn't all too worried about the situation, or didn't care if the town was destroyed. Darkness taking yet another sip from her beer made it seem like the situation wasn't as dire as it seemed at first glance. So, Izuku tried again as the screaming inside the hall had died down, what is the destroyer? The destroyer. Yun replied in surprise, the destroyer is the destroyer. You know, the destroyer. How can you not know about the destroyer? Wiz asked, surprised too, as she had come to believe Izuku was a living source of knowledge. Everyone knows about the destroyer. Izuku failed to understand. Master comes from a distant land. Chika suddenly intervened, her raspy whispers a welcome aid for the archdruid. His land is so far that the destroyer can't reach it. While everyone in his party had heard that part of his origins, they couldn't believe such a safe land existed. Megumin was the first to recover, and the next to remember why their beloved leader held no knowledge of this ancient evil. The mobile fortress destroyer. Megumin started, earning Izuku's full attention. It is an ancient superweapon created by a long-lost civilization. It was given the power to erase pretty much everything in its path, from tiny villages to large cities, from defenseless farmers to entire armies. For a couple thousand years it has been running rampant, destroying kingdoms, moving frontiers, erasing cultures. The first to fall was the empire that created it, and not even the Devil King has been able to stop it. The more Izuku listened to the explanation, the more he regretted never taking a look at the quest. If he had taken the time to at least scout this foe, he would have had more than enough time to develop a strategy, either for an efficient evacuation, or for a way to alter its trajectory to save towns. Now he was left with a catastrophe that he had no time to plan for, and only poor choices that would lead to someone suffering. It's armed with dozens of rapid-fire magi cannons. Its body is made entirely of an adamantium mithril alloy, which makes it extremely resistant to both physical and magical attacks. Yun continued, supplying more bad news for the stressed archdruid. Even the grass won't grow again due to the toxic waste it spills as it moves. Something shifted inside Izuku, something akin to a spark. The mere thought of something as destructive as the destroyer being allowed to rampage for millennia was sickening, so much indeed that he felt anger swelling up. It was as if the very planet was suffering, and it only made Izuku feel worse. How could this abomination be allowed to exist? Didn't Aqua send several other people to be heroes? Worse still is the super magic barrier surrounding the destroyer. Wiz joined now, adding even more things to the list of worries. That dome is practically indestructible. Izuku's brain came to a crashing halt. Did he just hear that the barrier was a dome? Wait a second. Izuku's scream earned everyone's attention. Not only from those in his party, but from the guild staff members, who were still in the process of saving as much paperwork as possible before fleeing for the hills. Are you telling me that the barrier is a dome? Izuku asked, getting stares, which forced him to elaborate, as in, it only covers the destroyer above ground, and not below? Like a sphere would do. 3 arch-wizards looked at the archdruid with nothing but honest confusion in their eyes. Izuku could only facepalm as said geniuses blinked in silent wonder. Why would a barrier ever need to go underground? It is very difficult for magicules to travel underground, you know? If barriers worked underground, the focal point wouldn't be able to move. Izuku began to tremble, lightly at first, but then the shakes started to become apparent. His bottled fury, combined with the cries for help of the very world, and fueled by the constant slapping in the face that was the stupidity of this world's inhabitants had reached critical mass. Something needed to become the receptacle of his anger, and he had just been given the target and the opportunity. "I'm sorry," Izuku stated with a wavering smile while standing up. "I need to go out there and punch something, really hard." The archdruid didn't wait for a reply, or anything really. He just walked out at a rather fast pace, fists balled and brows furrowed. He didn't even hear the girls calling for him to wait and explain. He even missed Liza abandoning her food in order to follow him. "Izuku!" Megumin's scream finally registered for the enraged archdruid. "Although he didn't stop, I know you want to put a stop to the destroyer. But, do you have a plan?" The petite crimson demon knew from the get-go that abandoning the town wasn't an option. If not because her boyfriend was a true noble hero, it would be because he wouldn't risk Liza's life by traveling during winter. And as terrifying as it was to stand in the path of the destroyer, she was ready to stand by his side to the very end. "Of course I have a plan," Izuku retorted in uncharacteristic fury. "I'm going to punch it." "That is not a plan," Yunyun retorted, turning into the voice of reason within the group. "You can't just walk right up to it without being vaporized by all the magi cannons. And there is the barrier too. Izuku, we know you want to save everyone, but charging head-on is not the answer." Wiz joined, not wanting to see her savior die so soon. "We should have hours before the destroyer gets near. We can still make a better plan." Izuku didn't slow down in the slightest, and the gates of the town were now in sight. What the girls didn't know was that the young druid was aware of the suffering. When the machine monster was far away, there was nothing to hear, but now that it was getting closer, Izuku could feel the cries for help. Forests were being razed, rivers and lakes left tainted, and plains rendered barren, not to mention all the people perishing as the destroyer simply trampled over everything and everyone. "Chika thinks Master needs to stop," Chika said as she jumped in front of her beloved master, extending her large wings to provide a living barricade. He was her hero, and the number one in her heart, and as such, she didn't want to risk his life against this ancestral foe. Master is not Thinug. Rather than stopping, Izuku just scooped Chika up in a hug, carrying her as he continued his march towards the gates. While she knew she should continue her efforts to stop the enraged druid, Chika was too busy enjoying the hug to say anything. Thanks to the Black Harpy's warmth, Izuku managed to calm down just enough to finally start thinking on a plan more complex than just punching the enemy like All Might would do. He, Izuku Midoriya, was not All Might. He would never be like All Might. He'd never be able to swoop in and brute force his way to victory. He'd never be capable of punching adversity away while smiling at the people with enough confidence to defeat fear itself. He'd never be the kind of hero he used to idolize. He needed to be his own hero. "Do you even know how to get past the magical barrier?" Megumin's voice finally reached the Emerald Druid, making him stop. Turning around to look at his party members, he finally noticed the worry in their eyes, and the fear of losing him. It made him feel a knot in his stomach to notice that the same look of worry and love in Megumin's eyes was also present in Yunyun's and Wiz's. It was also worrying to notice how Liza seemed to not doubt for a second that he would succeed. "Yes, I know how to bypass the barrier," Izuku replied as he placed Chika down. Noticing the looks of confusion, he decided to further explain. "You gave me the answer, the barrier doesn't go underground. I can attack it from below." The girls frowned at the obviously flawed tactic. "The destroyer moves very fast." Yunyun spoke for everyone. "I get that you can imitate World of Thorns, but by the time you can use it, the fortress will have moved from the spot. Then I'll stop it." Izuku replied like it was the most logical thing in the world. "And how, exactly, are you going to stop it?" Megumin wanted to know every angle. She really didn't want Izuku to get hurt or killed. There are multiple ways a druid can stop something big from moving. Another voice joined in, Keel having approached them as they were discussing things, and he seemed keen on helping out. "For starters, there are massive beasts that can shrug off magical attacks with ease, and then there is the fact that druids have spells that can modify the geography if given enough time and mana." Megumin and Yunyun were awed at the information. Of course they knew about such spells, but since almost no Crimson Demon would use it by virtue of not being part of the advanced magic branch, they forgot their applications on a large scale. But what animal could prove a challenge for the destroyer? was asked now, unable to think on a beast powerful, or even big enough, for the task ahead. The largest beast is the berserker gorilla standing at 5 meters tall. Ha! You disappoint me, child. Keel was quick to answer. The deathworm that rules over the mana-eating desert stands over 30 meters long, and is near damn immune to magic. Not to mention it has the burrowing prowess required for the assault. That monstrosity is a beast? Yunyun was horrified. Actually, all insectoids are considered beasts. Megumin added, not failing to jump at the chance to lord her knowledge over anyone, even Yunyun, especially over Yunyun. Not a bad option, but... Izuku interjected, grateful for the sudden injection of common sense. Said injection gave him the focus required to finally find his answer. I want to test something. Something that bothers me about the skill wild shape. Izuku turned to look outside the gates, the forest line close enough for Izuku to now hear the voice of nature calling to him for aid. Then he turned to look at his hands too weak to attempt to act like All Might, and yet, they had to be strong enough to save those in need. Wild shape allows us, druids, to transform into animals of any size. This depends on our power, our mana reserves, our focus, and our understanding of the creature. As such, druids can't transform into magical beasts, chimeras, dragons, or plants. Izuku explained to an audience that didn't understand why such widely available information was important right now, but why? At Izuku's question, all present couldn't help but to blink as their minds went blank. As far as common knowledge dictated, Izuku had just explained the answer to the question. Because they aren't beasts? Yunyun shyly replied, just to feel disappointed when Izuku shook his head. A druid can't turn into a bird until they understand how birds work. But understanding how magical creatures work, even how plants work, is not part of the available knowledge of this world. Izuku answered the obvious, then he smiled in a rather terrifying way, but what if that knowledge existed? If I understand how the biology of such creatures works, would I be able to transform into one of them? His party members suddenly had dumbfounded expressions, as if their minds had been suddenly blown away. Megumin was now muttering something about such a thing making sense, while Liza looked as if she had been lost somewhere during the explanation. You reincarnated a bunch of ancient undead, and even brought back a woman that had been waiting at the gates of heaven for centuries. Keel suddenly reminded everyone, I wouldn't be too surprised if you said you understand how the gods work and then turned into one. So go ahead and blow everyone's minds yet again, my friend. Izuku smiled at the odd show of encouragement, and then began to focus. He needed something big, strong, and capable of great magical feats. The list of creatures that could fit the bill wasn't very long, but when he took into consideration all the required skills for the operation, and his own aesthetic, only one creature fit the bill. For everyone else looking, Izuku had first turned green, and his hair had become leaves. Then his clothes merged into his body, revealing a genderless figure made of wood. It hadn't been hard for the archdruid, imagining how a humanoid body made of plant tissue would work. All organs were there, just made with different cells, muscles replaced with cellulose cords braided for maximum strength output, skin reinforced with ironbark, and bones replaced with hardened ebon wood. Before anyone could start speaking the word dryad, Izuku began to walk towards the forest. The moment he stepped outside the town, he began to grow. Little by little, step by step, he was getting taller, and his features were getting wilder and wilder. The hair was starting to become thorny vines, the skin turned rougher and rougher, growing thorns and tiny branches, and as he got closer to the forest line, he started to look less human, and more like a treant. They had been so focused on slowing Izuku down, that no one noticed that Keel wasn't the only one to join them at the gates. At first it was only staff members of the guild, then Dust and his party, and now half the town had joined the group to witness Izuku do something impossible yet again. They all had the hopes that somehow, the archdruid would be able to change the path of the ancestral superweapon. This may not be enough. Izuku thought as he continued to move forward, fully intending on stopping the monstrosity before it could start destroying the forest surrounding Axel. I need more power, more strength, more mass. Izuku was already halfway through the forest, already the size of a large tree, well over 10 meters tall. The change in size was already making him feel disoriented, the weight of his new arms and legs trying to slow him down in order to adapt to his new biology. But there on the horizon, the sight of a mechanized spider ant thing was starting to take shape. It was bigger than what he'd imagined. Mounted on the back of the machine appeared to be an actual castle, indicating that calling it a mobile fortress was no joke. And it was running rampant, trampling over everything standing in its way. It shouldn't have been possible, but the damn thing seemed to seek the path that would lead it to more destruction. As his mind went into overdrive, as the world slowed down around him while making calculations, Izuku was answered. You are not alone. Roots began to sprout from the ground, meeting his every stomping step. Rather than trapping him, or slowing him down, they fused with his body, increasing his mass. Take my strength. The few trees he could have collided with outstretched their branches, catching his own arms and torso. These trees came out of the ground, not as if they'd uprooted by force, but like they had stepped out themselves, twisting and fusing with the new body of the archdruid. Let me help. The few remaining flowers and even the grass began to fuse with the ever-changing and growing body, increasing not only the mass, but the size too. Their mana fused with the magical core that was the soul of the Emerald Druid. Let us help. A group of dryads, the very guardians of the forest, darted into the chest of the now massive tree-like warrior. Izuku, without knowing or noticing, had surpassed all living organisms. Now, standing slightly above 60 meters tall, the massive tree-like humanoid did not resemble a treant, or even an ent. While humanoid in shape, the arms and legs were longer than what would look correct, the torso was a single piece, giving nearly no flexibility, the head had a face, but it looked inhuman and yet very humanly angry. Countless branches sporting leaves of all shapes and colors were poking out of the head, giving the impression of poorly kept hair. The very size should have made it impossible for the creature to even move. But it was moving faster. Let us join. Izuku finally felt the voice. It wasn't just the forest giving him its strength, it was the very world. Ruruerur. The massive creature, the Titan, roared so loud that back in the town everyone felt their very bones shaking. Eyes glowing in a blinding emerald light looked at the enemy now fully visible, and just as it was about to get into range, a massive amount of mana eaters bloomed through the entire body, especially covering the arms. What should have taken several hours went by in mere minutes. Rather than allowing the destroyer to trample the forest and reach the town to make a last stand, Izuku was meeting it in the plains beyond the forest line. Screech! The mobile fortress destroyer let out its own war cry, seemingly accepting the challenge of the one defending all life. Boom! The two colossal monsters clashed at last, the shockwave felt even all the way back in town. Rather than metal meeting wood, the barrier flashed continuously as Izuku pushed against it, still separating his hands from the face of the metal monster he wanted to rip off so badly. Izuku failed to stop the monster though, and now was being pushed back. However, he had succeeded where everyone else had failed. The destroyer slowed down by at least 1/4 of its original speed. You will stop. Izuku shouted as he raised one foot, barely managing to keep his balance and the required force to slow down the monster. Now. Stomp. Izuku stomped against the ground hard and fast, and at the same moment, vines the size of enormous trees sprouted from below the destroyer, lashing and thrashing while ensnaring the multiple legs of the enemy of nature. Screech. The destroyer made sounds akin to anger, and perhaps pain. Its speed was lowered even further. The anger of the monstrosity was made even clearer as all the magi cannons aimed at Izuku. A veritable volley of what the druid would easily call laser beams rained upon his transformed body. It hurt, a lot. It felt like red-hot steel was trying to puncture his skin, but at the same time, he could tell that the mana eaters were doing their job. The strength of the beams was but a small fraction of the actual output, a kind of power Izuku really didn't want to receive. The flowers died almost instantly upon impact, but new ones bloomed just as fast. It happened fast, too fast, and yet, just as fast they had entered the forest line. Izuku had had enough. You shall? Izuku intoned as he raised his other foot, not pass. As he stomped, colossal spikes came out from below the destroyer, this time suspending it in the air. Some of the spikes even managing to pierce the thick armor of the rampant superweapon. The mechanical monster screeched and tried to thrash, but the massive vines had all but immobilized its legs. The magi cannons, usually fast to turn and shoot, were now struggling against constantly growing plants blocking their gears and aiming systems. Just die already! Izuku screamed, getting desperate. Everything hurt. Every place that had been shot felt like he had been stabbed. His hands felt as if they were holding fire. He wanted to finish this quickly, but the barrier didn't show signs of breaking, so he had to keep pushing power into the spikes and vines, hoping to overrun the insides of the monster. Clank! Some of the legs came off, taking with them the vines that had them entangled. Clank! 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 Those very same legs were then replaced by brand new ones, which proceeded to attack the spikes holding it in the air. Are you kidding me? This was the worst. More vines were commanded to seize the newly grown legs, but then the other legs came off, and were quickly replaced by new ones. Izuku soon found himself focusing more on creating new vines rather than empowering the spikes to break the destroyer. This wasn't a standstill, it was an attrition battle. Izuku didn't know what kind of power source the destroyer had, but it seemed unlimited, unlike his own mana reserves, and the reserves of the forest. He needed a solution, fast, or everything would be for nothing. Izuku! Master! Megumin's and Chika's voices sounded by his side. Without noticing, Chika had carried Megumin and placed her on his now colossal shoulder. The horrible screeching of the harpy felt like the caress of an angel, and the voice of her girlfriend like the voice of a goddess, a true one. Master is not alone. Chika yelled while flying in front of Izuku's face, looking angry for being left behind in this important mission. Master needs to remember that everyone will back him up. You have fought with bravery beyond that of a million heroes. Now is my turn to aid you. Megumin shouted, for once managing to sound as epic as she always intended, while dropping the Chuyuni act completely. Now watch how I can also modify a spell in the fly. Hold fast and have faith in the power you unleashed in me. Words spoken, the petite arch-wizard began to cast Big Bang. Under any other circumstance, Izuku would have panicked. They weren't just within blast range, they were going to be right at the epicenter of the singularity. However, he chose to believe. Believe that his girlfriend would be able to pull off a miracle, or that at the very least Chika would be fast enough to carry her away in time. Megumin, however, had managed to imitate Izuku to an extent. Rather than modify the spell, she just modified the containment field rather than shooting the ball. As careful as it was possible, she opened a tiny slit in the field, specifically on the side facing the destroyer. Her true aim was to make a thin but powerful beam that would pierce the barrier, and nail the monster in the head, hopefully killing it, or at least stunning it enough for Izuku to finish the deed. Eraser Blast. Megumin shouted the new variation of her spell. She fully expected it to be a repeat of her first Big Bang, a disappointing-looking thing ending in a bombastic show. Instead, vroom! A column of blinding light was what shot from her hand. A massive stream of accelerated particles flowed savagely forward with a potency never seen before. It had been too much for Megumin though, the backlash too strong for her frail body to handle, her arm too weak to tolerate such pressure. Said arm broke barely a second after casting the new spell and she fell backwards. The beam had been directed straight for just that instant, immediately moving upwards into the sky and away from the destroyer. But it had been enough. The perfect barrier protecting the monstrosity had broken like delicate crystal trying to stop a freight train. The beam even managed to nail its head while moving upwards, splitting it, and leaving a gaping hole through half the castle on its back. Izuku managed to grow soft vines and branches to catch and protect his girlfriend, just as he reared back his massive arm. This situation had been going for far too long, and now his beloved Megumin had been hurt. Fury renewed, he prepared himself to unleash every bit of anger, every bit of delayed justice. Ruro Ohea Air. Izuku launched his fist forward, the mass of such, and the speed it gained, generating a sonic boom as it moved. Crash! The impact, brutal as it was not the end. Vines burrowed inside the destroyer, seeking the source of power within the monstrosity, to leave no chance whatsoever of it regenerating. Guided by mana eaters blooming at the tips, the vines quickly reached the pulsating orb giving life to the fortress. It was unnecessary, but the plant appendages yanked out the orb with gratuitous violence, annihilating the entire chamber while doing so. They also thrashed about as they pulled out, regenerating as they were burnt by the orb, even as the metal around them began to melt due to the intense heat of the now unstable power source. Once it was out, Izuku spared just 1 second to look at what seemed to be a mini-sun sitting in his hand. It wasn't bigger than an adult's head, and yet, you have caused too much suffering, too many deaths. Izuku intoned, taking notice of how the orb was actually concentrated mana, returned to the earth. Fuel new life to replace what you took. With that said, Izuku, in his colossal form, ate the orb. Using his current connection with nature, he decompressed the orb, and then channeled that energy through his feet roots into the ground. The earth happily received the mana, dispersing it through the land in a massive radius, but the action had come at a price. While it lasted just 1 minute, the process had been excruciatingly painful to the arch-druid. His insides were set ablaze. His mind assaulted by endless jolts of pain. It was like his body was breaking apart. And yet, he endured. And when it was over, the colossal tree titan knelt down, and Izuku embraced unconsciousness. Chapter 20. Winter Blues. It had been 3 days since the mobile fortress destroyer attempted to destroy the town of Axel, the so-called town of beginners. 3 days since the day the ancestral superweapon finally met its end at the hands of one Izuku Midoriya and his partner Megumin, the most famous Crimson Demon of the current generation. It had also been 3 days of the scariest lockdown to ever happen to the town. Inside her office, a certain busty attendant sighed as she continued to write her report. After Izuku destroyed the destroyer, and he went silent, several things happened. First, the archdruid came out of the chest of the gargantuan treant, gently carried, alongside Megumin, by a group of dryads. This wouldn't have been an out-of-place sight, considered who the hero was, but the group was dressed, as in, not only not naked, but surprisingly well covered. Many witnesses refrained from loudly commenting on that fact, but there were opinions about it, some saying that the dryads probably feared retribution from the petite crimson demon, others called upon the sight being similar to rowdy children being shy in front of their parents. Luna may have been just as bothered by the sight, but the fact that the verdant titan remained after the event was what captured her attention, almost all of it. Taking a look at her report, she looked at how she had worded the next part, and how it would sound to the Grandmaster. With the archdruid out of commission, and his lover incapacitated, the ominous sounds coming from the carcass of the ancestral superweapon nearly gave her a heart attack. Whatever ancient mechanisms holding together the monstrosity had been starting to collapse, which could have ended in a seriously destructive explosion, had not the entire forest come to life and charged against the stubborn machinery. Treants were a serious threat even for mid-level adventurers. A single one of them could wipe out a medium-sized party of rookies with ease. There were dozens of them, tearing apart the carcass of the destroyer, ensuring that no additional explosions were likely to happen. Luna wanted to believe that this army of treants was no threat to the town, that they were subservient to Izuku, and thus, a magnificent line of defense for the town of Axel. Unfortunately, Izuku had yet to speak to anyone about this, and no one had the courage to go up to the treants and dryads to ask. Except for a certain dwarf artisan, and the newly settled redeemed lich. As soon as the remains of the destroyer stopped giving signs of trying to blow up, Keel and Talanoff approached the tree warriors and made their demands. Keel wanted to pick out a trophy for Izuku, a memento of his victory over the most dangerous enemy of the world. Talanoff just wanted to get his hands on as much metal and artifacts as he could. The treants were all too happy to allow Keel to select some trinket or other from the rubble of what seemed like a throne control room, while Talanoff just designated an area where they could place all the metallic and oily garbage. To be fair, Talanoff worded it as collecting trash site, so he could remove it from the forest in an orderly fashion. Luna looked away from the document, allowing her mind to be distracted as she wondered how he was going to work with the pieces of the destroyer's armor. She highly doubted that the dwarf had a smelter hot enough to melt the metal, or a hammer strong enough to shape the ingots in the unlikely case he can get them. The busty attendant sighed as she wondered how to reach Izuku right now. If not to pester him for answers, then at least to prod for an opportunity to join his. Knock. Knock. The steady knocking on her door brought Luna out of her musings, although she didn't had time to call the guest in before the door opened. Sorry for intruding, a scantily dressed young woman with light green hair entered without waiting for a prompt. I was told to come here to clear my situation with the guild. Luna recognized this woman, one of Kyuya's companions. There was no need to ask, or guess, what business she had with the guild. The entire team had been black-marked due to a string of stupidity they committed. First and chief among them was their unauthorized run on Keel's dungeon. That nearly ended with the whole town being swallowed by the undead. Well, according to Keel, he was just going to seal his tomb for a century or two while he reigned in his anger, but she didn't feel like correcting the guildmaster's fears at the time. Besides, the situation still ended with the town losing the dungeon. And you are? Luna asked while making the effort to make it clear she was looking behind the woman, obviously expecting more people to enter. Clemia, the thief. Clemia presented herself, making an effort to clarify that she was of commoner origins, and proud to be an adventurer. She also made a show of indicating that she was alone. While their first transgression had been bad enough to keep their cards marked for 3 years, messing with the vacation home of a noble was enough to increase the penalty to 10 whole years. Turns out that the recent haunting problem the town had was also traceable to this particular group of idiots. Ghosts and spirits causing trouble around town had been a nuisance, but when the largest concentration fell into the vacation home of one of the few nice nobles of the region, it escalated into a very real concern. 10 priests attempted to exorcise the home, and all of them failed. They were sent back into the streets naked and covered in various colorful substances, and occasionally, feathers. When the situation seemed lost, the noble resorted to selling his vacation home, which of course meant that the guild had to buy it and then deal with the problem, or that was what Aldorp ordered upon hearing about this tragedy. I'm not going to say that my former party is innocent, nor that the penalty is unfair. Clemia started, taking a seat in front of the busty attendant, and completely ignoring the paperwork that said attendant was trying to still finish. I just want to clarify my involvement in the situation, the current situation of my former party, and then negotiate a way out. Young as she looked, Luna was still a veteran when dealing with adventurers, especially the ones like Clemia. The girl had been expecting to deal with a man, that much was obvious, hence her slight panic, and now was acting submissive to make up for her mistake. Luna guessed that had this thief known she was facing a woman, she would have been far more polite, instead of invading her office. Had the situation been different, Luna may have been in the mood to show some lenience, but 500 million heiress? Perhaps for the nobles that was a pittance for a manor, but for the guild that was 5 years of budget. In fact, if it hadn't been for Kiel, this branch of the guild would have been sent into bankruptcy due to that incident. The former lich only paid 150 million, but by solving the haunting problem, he earned the necessary clout to ask for a lease, which was accepted by the noble upon hearing of his valiant effort. Turns out, the haunting was the result of their graveyard being sealed by a divine barrier, which prevented the souls of the departed from finding their resting place. The former lich immediately recognized the workmanship of the barrier, and called out the miscreants who vandalized his tomb as the same culprits, which, when compounded by Ila's recognition of the description, just added more guilt to Kuya's already growing list of misdeeds. Luna set her paperwork aside and motioned for the green-haired thief to explain. She didn't, however, promise in any way, shape, or form to help the thief out of her problem. While her party leader had been the brains behind all the recent troubles of the town, this particular thief was ratted out by her former, and betrayed, comrade. One thing Luna didn't forgive was betrayal. That was one fact Clemia the thief was about to learn the hard way. At the common area of the guild hall, the reunited adventurers had been engaged in non-stop gossip for a while now. For days they were brainstorming the meaning of the recent feats of their local celebrity, ranging from poor Izuku being the owner of a massive harem of dryads, to him being some sort of demigod. It didn't help that thinking that his previous accomplishments were the result of him being special made them feel less like trash. Then there was the fact that a set of previously branded, useless, adventurers had jumped into nearly hero status. There was talk about the reason behind this, from the idea that all their new gear was to blame, to the possibility of Izuku blessing them through lewd acts. Today had been special though, as Clemia's arrival made for a new source of gossip. The adventurer Kuya, the former ace of Axel, was previously known for being seen as invincible, capable of completing any quest he wanted to take. He was even scouted by the crown as a potential hero. But after attempting to mess with a certain green-haired archdruid had fallen into massive debt. Abandoned one of the companions he swore would never be betrayed. Chickened out of protecting the city he swore to protect against Beldia. Fucked up Kiel's dungeon and the respawning chests. And now, sending one of his companions alone to fix his mistakes? The gossiping was going wild. Some speculated that the greenette was sent to obviously appease Izuku, her feminine charms an obvious choice for the task, which of course made Kuya a bastard in the eyes of most people. A few brought up the possibility of the swordsmaster abandoning this pretty girl too, expecting her to not make it back to the city, or taking for granted that no one would believe her over his own word. Some even supported the idea of the now official coward of the town trying to get rid of his original partners so he could start anew somewhere else. In the eyes of the gathered adventurers, Kuya Mitsurugi was bam! The door of the guild hall opened with a bit more force than any normal party would have used. Immediately after a pair of young women entered, silencing the entirety of the reunited adventurers with their mere presence. "I'm not telling you to slack off." Darkness all but screamed, looking rather miffed after returning from wherever she and her companion had gone. "I'm just saying that you don't need to shoot every enemy that is about to reach me. I can take a couple dozen of them no problem." Those were cruel wasps. Cruel wasps. Ela shouted back in clear exasperation, even throwing her hands up for added emphasis. "Those things will not only sting you. They will sting you repeatedly until death. Not to mention that their venom is said to cause so much pain that a single sting can send a veteran adventurer into a seizure." Everyone in the guild hall winced. The monster described was rather frail, but they were so fast that hitting them with arrows was considered a heroic feat. Then many started to panic after the realization that such threat was lurking so close to the town of beginners. Rumors were starting to form around the prospect of either how to survive the threat and if fleeing was still an option. "And you killed them all." Darkness shamelessly complained like someone who saw her toys getting destroyed. "How long do you think I'll have to wait for someone to try to smuggle those again? Traveling to the ghastly Badlands is already rare enough, you know?" No one could hide their relief at hearing the unintended clarification. It wasn't unheard of for unscrupulous nobles to make such unreasonable requests. Trying to get live cruel wasps was new though. Usually nasty nobles were happy enough with collecting their stingers to use as torture tools, especially with how vicious the cat-sized bugs were. "Did I heard that correctly?" a certain blonde noble asked, taking the risk of approaching party members of the hero of Axel, you fought and killed over a dozen cruel wasps. While the leering noble had learned his lesson and stayed away from the archdruid's party, he still eyed Ila's weapon with greed. Bow guns had begun to circulate in the market, proving in many ways to be superior to crossbows. However, the complicated inner workings, the delicate maintenance they required, as well as their need for specialized ammo, made many ranged fighters second-guess their purchase. To make it worse, only Talanoff knew how to make them of acceptable quality. Many blacksmiths, and no few dwarves, had attempted to recreate them. Some from scratch, just looking at them from afar, while others went through the humiliation of purchasing one, only to break it apart to copy the design. All inferior copies. A couple dozen, yes. Darkness replied while Ila used her as a shield, not believing for a second that the idiot noble wouldn't try to get his hands on her. Bianca, what is it to you, Yavin? The idiot noble eyed Ila for another split second. To add insult to injury, Talanoff's bowguns, while superb, were still nothing like the original. Bianca was unique, a piece of art so refined that it made all others look like junk in comparison. He and other nobles demanded the same quality, but no matter how much they offered, or how many threats they threw at him, the damned dwarf still refused. He had excused himself with the lack of materials, which turned out to be some outrageous things that no one had heard about before. How could one get hellflame melted silvered mithril? What's even god-touched ironbark? Before you try to sell the remains to the guild, I want to make you an offer. Yavin started, trying to sound as neutral as possible, 1 million eris for each intact body, and 300,000 for those that can only be harvested for the stingers. Everyone in the guild turned to look at the noble. The offer had been rather fair. The little monsters were stupidly valuable, even if only as tools for nefarious purposes. The guild bought them both to keep them away from unscrupulous nobles, and to use the stingers as special weapons against humanoid monsters. The guild paid less though. Can't do that. Darkness flatly replied, and then tried to walk to the counter. The noble wasn't going to give up that easily though. What? Why? Yavin kept calling for attention, much to the annoyance of the two girls. Because we burned them. Ila explained while still using darkness as a shield, it's what Izuku would have wanted, after all. The answer didn't surprise anyone. Izuku was filthy rich, more than enough to buy a nobility title. To make things worse, he was known for spending only when necessary, which meant that he was saving a massive amount of eris every day. To be fair though, he did spend a lot on keeping his harem happy. But when weighed against how little he wasted on himself or on fancy food, it more than compensated for the expenses, especially when considering just how elite the girls were. Like they had forgotten how little they thought about them not too long ago. Why would you do that? The women accompanying the idiot noble screamed as one, all of them feeling the rewards from Yavin's family turn to ashes alongside the evil bugs. Because it was the right thing to do. Darkness bit back, sending a glare that indicated she wasn't in the mood to keep bickering about that specific topic. Ila wisely decided not to add that, while Izuku would have ordered such just to avoid the use of the stingers on other people, she had done it in order to not have to explain to Izuku why Darkness used them on herself. Hi, Maria. Darkness greeted the guild attendant, the elven girl wincing at the prospect of having to deal with this particular party. I take it Luna is busy elsewhere? It was nothing but a friendly question, but since their ascension to elite, dealing with this party, or rather, this party without Izuku, was something everyone dreaded. Hence why Luna was given the job of designated attendant for them. Well, Maria tried, and failed, to come up with some sort of conversation to stall for time. Fortunately for her, she didn't have to pray for a miracle. The door of the office opened, revealing a smug-looking Luna, followed by a distressed green-haired girl that looked oddly familiar. You have your options, now go, and I don't want to hear that you are making trouble. Luna commanded the girl that exited with her, and then turned to look at Darkness and Ila, her mood changing dramatically. Darkness, Ila. Welcome back. How did the herb gathering go? Everyone winced as they understood that, once again, a simple rookie quest turned into something unreasonable. An Axel thing, really. No real complaints from us. Darkness replied casually. Speak for yourself. Ila quickly interrupted. Some idiot tried to smuggle 2 crates full of live cruel wasps. Which you killed and then incinerated before they even had a chance to attack. Darkness vehemently countered, earning a sigh of relief from the busty attendant, and a jaw nearly dropping to the floor from a certain thief. While Luna was ever so grateful that Izuku had come back, and saved everyone in her city, she was still in a dire situation. Izuku's party was still taking quests, albeit minor ones, and with a much slower pace, meaning that the completion rate was still plummeting. She couldn't complain though, because, just like when Beldia attacked, Izuku actually got hurt while saving everyone's skin. Meanwhile, Solstice Manor? Izuku Midoriya, arch-druid and holder of way too many titles he really didn't want, stared at the canopy of the large bed he was resting on. He had just woken up yesterday, although he was only able to start moving since this morning. He avoided doing such due to the pain though. Why? Izuku asked mentally, knowing that finding answers was a fool's errand. Why did it have to happen? He shouldn't have been comfortable, there was no reason for it. His passive comfort demanded harsh conditions to properly relax, after all. However, right now, he was feeling pretty well, or at least as comfortable as someone who hurt all over could be. All because he was actually resting atop Liza. The Gator Girl was just entering hibernation, going into fits of near comatose slumber that she valiantly tried to resist in order to guard her beloved master, efforts that were proving futile in the face of instincts and biological needs. Fortunately, she had been eating non-stop since the incident with the destroyer, meaning that she was safe to sleep all winter without worrying about starvation. Izuku moved his head just a little bit, feeling conflicting emotions about enjoying too much using Liza's breasts as pillows. On one hand, she still had her slave mentality, making this some kind of abuse. On the other hand, she was pretty much comatose due to her hibernation, meaning she was defenseless. Then again, she looked extremely happy about having this kind of contact, as indicated by her slow tail wag. It was taking everything he had to not just attack her, or any of the other girls. Please. Izuku began to beg inside his mind as he realized the only reason that his hands weren't groping Liza's breasts was because it was really painful to do so. At least try to show you don't want me to do this. For good or ill, Keel had been the one to explain why he was showing so little self-restraint. Turns out that classes had an impact on the people. Rather than being common knowledge, it was an accepted reality of the adventurer system. Warriors were boisterous, mages were smart, rogues were sneaky. It was something so intertwined with one's base personality that no one paid it any mind. However, certain classes did more than exacerbating the original personality. Druids were mysterious not because the knowledge of their class was protected, but because druids rarely remained in contact with civilization. Keel used to have druid friends back before becoming a lich, and thus, knew a bit more than most. And as he explained, druids were a little too attuned to the natural world. That attunement made them more inclined to give in to natural impulses, as well as accepting the needs of their own body and that of others. The knowledge was harmless on its own, as that merely meant being more assertive, and more likely to accept the advances of other people. Unfortunately, druids were also affected by the seasons. Seasons affected druids in a variety of ways, and in most cases, these ways differed from one druid to the other. For Izuku, it affected how energetic his approach to things turned out to be. He had been very understanding and forgiving that first month, the end of spring, then he went and become strangely active through summer. Autumn made him stupidly intolerant, and now that winter had finally arrived. The door slowly opened, revealing the poking head of a rather shy-looking Megumin. Just that morning he had been a little too forward with the kissing and cuddling, even if he couldn't freely move. That incident had startled her a little bit, which led to her going for a walk to cool off. "How is my grumpy boyfriend feeling?" Megumin asked with a slight blush, still not entering the room proper. Izuku looked at her without even trying to remove himself from his pillows. His petite girlfriend made it very clear that she didn't hate the energetic attention, she just felt that she wasn't ready to go further beyond, at that moment. He had also decided to take her up on her offer about allowing him to be playful with Chika and Liza. "Still grumpy?" Izuku replied, failing to convey any sort of animosity, or the fact that he already missed her warm and lithe body. "I could use a hug and a kiss though." For her part, Megumin couldn't help but to look at her wonderful boyfriend, the man that kept doing the impossible, that kept surprising everyone while becoming stronger with each feat. Her Izuku, who was now as defenseless as a newborn kitten, changed due to his insane feats worthy of a demigod. Whatever he did against the destroyer came with a price. His hair turned leafy, although you wouldn't be able to tell until you touched it. Then, he had grown horns that looked more like small antlers masquerading as branches. Keel had spoken about his attunement to the seasons, something made apparent by his hair changing from deep green to ashen gray. When combined with how radical his behavior changed when winter actually started, it made it seem like he was a different person. This person was still her Izuku though. No amount of grumpiness, touchy desires, and overall greed of heart he showed, he was still the benevolent guy that changed her for the better. Having even more romantic attention didn't feel bad at all too. Knowing that it would be linked to the season she preferred to stay indoors was certainly a boon. "I'm sorry I scared you," Izuku lamented, seemingly accepting that his girlfriend would probably be on guard thanks to his outburst of affection. "No. It's not that. Megumin quickly panicked, and then finally entered the room. I just didn't know how. Izuku quickly noticed that something was wrong, or rather, that the arch-wizard was hiding something, in her chest, below her pajamas, supported by her arms still in a plaster. While Cecily and the Dryads had made a good effort on healing the both of them, they were still in need of further castings of healing spells. Castings that neither church seemed too happy to perform. Still, watching Megumin move with almost full freedom eased the heart and mind of the arch-druid. He still wondered what could she possibly hide below her clothes, and why was she nervous about it. Then she reached him, ending up by his side. Her position allowed Izuku to notice that the mound on her chest was irregular. Then, something poked out from the collar of her pajamas, accidentally unbuttoning the top 2 buttons. Nya! What poked out was a black cat's head, albeit with a small symbol on its forehead. The meowing had been blatantly fake though. Megumin. Izuku started, throwing a deadpan stare at the petite crimson demon. Why were you hiding this little fellow? The petite arch-wizard actually winced. She had always wanted a pet, not a familiar, bound to her will by magic, but a normal pet. Her familial and financial circumstances never allowed it, to the point that the last time she had a cat on her hands, she had to let it go before her sister could eat it. Can I keep it? Megumin begged with big watery eyes, please? She was ready to go into the typical tirade about being very responsible about the cat, especially how she'd make sure the sweet little thing would be properly fed and kept out of everyone's way. It was completely unnecessary though. Sure. Izuku plainly agreed, all while motioning for his girlfriend to stop being stubborn and lay down with him, just keep her safe. With a big and vibrant smile, Megumin moved to take her place on the bed. The little animal easily crawled out of her clothes and nestled atop the druid's head. Izuku found the action adorable, enough to allow him to fight his new grumpy impulses. Does she have a name? Izuku began to ask, still wondering what kind of creature his petite girl had brought with her. She will Komosuke. The name thrown was completely unexpected, making Izuku look at his girlfriend with confusion in his eyes. Naya. The fake meowing clearly conveyed that the creature had given up on arguing about the name, and had resigned herself to answer to it. Megumin's face didn't help the scene either. She looked like a child who had done some kind of mischief, and now wanted to pass as innocent. With his grumpy levels getting high again, he decided that arguing wasn't worth it. Sure, why not? Izuku replied, and then made to kiss his girl. Megumin was the one to close the distance though, and soon, they started a slow kissing session. Indeed, the bed, the covers, even the well-painted walls were uncomfortable, and were getting on his nerves. But the kissing and the cuddling? The warmth of his girls? That completely overshadowed all that, making him feel really great. Outside the manor. Wiz, the last of the Avariel, watched her target from the cover of a bush. She loved more than the feathers of the black harpy she was admiring. She was cute, adorable, and lovely. Above all else, she reminded her of the little girl she adopted long ago, before her fall. Chica hummed as she sharpened her talons against one of the multiple stones in the backyard. The sound produced by her sharp claws was almost as bad as her voice. The little girl was probably a grown woman now, with her own family and her own worries. As much as she had wanted to watch her grow, that ship sailed too long ago for her to do something. At least she left her everything she owned back when she was the Ice Witch. Chica took a moment to admire her claws, just as she did when admiring her feathers after properly clean each and every one of them. As the winged arch-wizard stealthily moved towards her target, she couldn't help but admire the harpy, how she went from another slave to someone who could proudly stand beside her lover. Wiz always knew she wouldn't get her old life back, not that she wanted it, but Izuku had given her something much better. She could have her own new life. No need to return to the behaviors that nearly killed her dear friends and led to that girl having to grow alone when she had promised her constant presence. No. Not just any life. She wanted a life with Izuku. She fell for the boy long ago. Not for his money, or his power, but for his tender heart. She wasn't going to force her way into the arms of the cute druid though. She conceded that Megumin would always be first, and that the boy was in a precarious situation in which he didn't want to hurt anyone, but she knew it was only a matter of time. Wiz placed herself in arm's reach of the black harpy, ready to pounce with a warm hug. Druids, as a class, was largely unknown. However, one thing she learned is that druids got a massive boost to their stamina, something that the petite crimson demon lacked. Izuku may deny having a harem, but she knew it wouldn't be long before the girls already in it started looking for more sisters to keep up with their man. And she would be there when that time came. Chica! Wiz shouted in absolute delight as she leaped forward with her arms stretched out. She could already feel the fluffy feathers, especially the long and majestic tail. Wham! Instead, she crashed against the rock that the harpy had been using to sharpen her claws. Ugh! Wiz couldn't even begin to understand what had happened, and how she ended hitting the rock headfirst. Dummy! Chica whispered from her perch atop the tree next to the rock where Wiz had crashed. Chica had learned nearly from birth to be always aware of her surroundings. Noticing Wiz stalking her had been the easiest of her tasks. From there, she just had to use minor illusion to make an image of herself to bait the winged wizard. For all her intelligence, Wiz was way too easy to trick. A little bit away from the winged duo, a different arch-wizard was showcasing her own obsession. It works! Yunyun cheered in overwhelming joy as she observed the result of studying Izuku's forbidden knowledge. In her hands, she was holding the pretty wand that the druid had bought for her, the heart-shaped Magiseat gem glowing intensely as it was used as the emanation point of the lightning sword she had created. The violet light was as beautiful as it was ominous. No, not lightning. Yunyun sobered as her mind went into all the theory behind this development. Lightning is just the effect, electricity is the name of the energy, the flow of electrons. The beautiful Crimson Demon gave a few slow swings with her new toy. The near-malevolent humming sounds it made sent Keel's subordinates into a panic, forcing them to take a few steps back. They had seen many magical swords, but none remembered feeling such dread at the sight of one. Encasing lightning, and expecting to use it as a weapon is not efficient. Yunyun spoke more to herself than to anyone else, evoking Izuku's line of thought, once it strikes, lightning is gone, its energy spent or dispersed. Electricity is better off used in changing part of the air into supercharged elements, which when contained inside a special magic field. Yunyun called upon all the lessons of swordsmanship that her clan forced into everyone, the endless drills that would help in controlling their iconic light of saber. Swoosh! Swinging against a previously prepared training dummy, a hastily made straw doll covered in cheap iron armor, revealed the potential of the developed spell. Thud! The upper half of the dummy fell to the ground, its armor providing absolutely no protection against the blade made of pure energy. To make things far more worrying, the division in the armor was glowing red and slightly melted, the straw inside had turned into a charred mess. Becomes a heat source comparable to the sun. Yunyun looked at the effects of her new magic, and couldn't help the grin adorning her cute face. This is plasma. The core of my lightsaber. It was nothing but a play on the spell used as a base. The well-developed Crimson Demon had just optimized the wasteful light of saber, and then added Izuku's knowledge. Compared to Megumin's Big Bang, and subsequent Eraser Blast, Yunyun's lightsaber had required a lot less effort. No one of Keel's friends had the guts to mention that though, not even behind her back. The fact that this magic weapon required just a fourth of the mana required to cast the light of saber was also scary. I still need to test it in combat. Yunyun muttered, transfixed by the luminous blade. Hey guys, do you? The moment she turned to talk to the reincarnated adventurers, she noticed she was all alone. The men and women, veterans with centuries of experience in combat, had turned tail. Yunyun could only pout as she made a deadpan expression. She had almost forgotten this lonely feeling thanks to Izuku, and now these people had reminded her of it. She couldn't complain though, as they were giving her a room in this medium-sized manor just for being Izuku's friend. The thought of having friends made her feel butterflies, especially when thinking about Izuku giving her encouraging words. Back at the guild hall, Clemia sighed. Sitting alone while considering her options, she realized that she had moved too late to make any meaningful entrance, and too soon to understand enough of her new target. Moving back to Axel had taken longer than expected, and also had required much more legwork than she had anticipated, of the kind she disliked the most. The reason for this was due to trying to save as much money as possible. That decision had led to her taking the cheapest caravans, and joining the bodyguards for free, not that she could officially take requests or charge for any kind of service. Also she could present a bag full of coins as a peace offering to Ila. But it didn't work. The pink-haired ranger rejected the money, even when Clemia explained that it had been the money they were supposed to leave for her to survive on before they could return to save her. Ila didn't seem to care though, instead politely telling her to keep it instead for her own survival, as Izuku was guaranteed to reject her. Ila also assured her that trying to butter up the druid would only backfire in the most horrible of ways. Sighing again, Clemia looked at what awaited her. The guild attendant, that busty woman that shouldn't hold that much authority, had sentenced her to either pay a third of the reparations for the fuck-up of her party, or complete 100 quests without pay. Why do I have to work this hard? Clemia quietly lamented, comically nursing her glass of water, another sad reminder that she was in dire straits. I hate working hard. Clemia's class skills were best suited to avoid combat, avoid hard work, and avoid danger. Her personal expertise was to deal with men. Most males only required a smile, well-placed words, and showing some leg to bend them to her will. A few required the type of legwork she did enjoy, even if she rarely did so due to her own high standards. The owner of the carriage? That one would have been nice to work with, but he was accompanied by his wife and child, meaning that she had to work for real to pay for her seat. Getting extra favors from Kyuya had also been good work, but the fool finally outlived his usefulness. She had made a detailed plan to work with Izuku, climbing to the top of his harem and find an easy and fulfilling life. Now she had been warned about even trying it. It made sense, though. While the rumors she had heard back before leaving Kyuya were something impressive, what she heard while traveling had taken her breath away. Inventing new spells, earning recognition from the crown, and to surpass even Beldia's demise, the defeat of the destroyer. There was no room to cast doubt into that last feat, as the evidence of the feat was there, on the side of the main road outside the town. Clemia shivered at the memory of the Titan, sleeping at the side of the road, seemingly waiting for a wake-up call to wreak havoc upon the world. Izuku's call, no less. "Hi there." Clemia was snapped out of her musings by a cheerful greeting, and a mug of ale being placed before her, couldn't help but notice you moping. "What's your story?" Looking at the new arrival, Clemia couldn't help but notice that she remembered this particular girl. Her silver short hair and air of mischief was well known among other thieves. "You are? Chris, right?" Clemia asked as she guardedly grabbed the offered mug, "the thief that the heiress church hires?" "Yes." Chris deadpanned as she waited for her fellow thief to take a sip of the perfectly safe ale, "And you are Clemia, one of Kyuya's bitches." The greenette couldn't help but to spit out her drink at the moniker. If it was widespread, then her chances of securing a safe spot in a strong party were gone like ashes in the wind. Strong adventurers didn't like their partners to be mistaken with common whores, after all. Don't worry, skillful thieves are easily accepted regardless of their inclinations. Chris offered, earning another deadpan from the other thief, "We can also spread a rumor of you being taken advantage of by that fake hero wannabe." "That's what actually happened." Clemia growled back, knowing that such a story would take time to circulate, along with a lot of hard work. The silver-haired thief left out a playful giggle, one that spoke of not believing a single word. "You are a thief too," Clemia stated as she returned to her drink, savoring the last bit of alcohol she would likely have in a long time. "You know what happened." Of course Chris knew, just not in the way Clemia thought. As Chris the thief, she was aware of the fast-traveling rumors that fed the barely legal depths of the underworld. As the goddess heiress, however, she had been aware of every step taken by the reincarnated Kyuya. All his mistakes, as well as those of his party members. She knew of Clemia's plans, and what they spelled for Izuku, more importantly though, what they could entail for her beloved. Neither as Chris nor heiress could she allow this greedy human to succeed. "Yes. Yes I do." Chris replied as she took a sip of her own ale, "I know of your dire straits, and how difficult of a situation you are in." Clemia just sunk deeper into her growing depression. There wasn't just any easy way out of this situation. "So, I want to propose a little joint venture." Chris began to explain, using her divine skills to sound even more compelling than she should, "one that will allow you to save face before the guild, and may even make Izuku turn his head and see you in a more favorable light." Clemia grimaced, knowing very well that between thieves, this was known as the prelude to hell. This other thief was about to exploit her, but, at the same time, with so little in the way of options, perhaps it'd be better than nothing. "What's the job?" Clemia asked, knowing that hearing Chris out couldn't hurt her any more than she already was. "And what's in it for you?" Chris lifted her hands in a placating gesture, trying to show she was being honest. "The job itself is relatively easy," Chris stated as she took an even more relaxed posture. "In fact, your part of the job is more along the lines of being a witness." "Are we framing someone?" Clemia quickly asked. It was one of the easiest jobs that the underworld had to offer. Being false witnesses, planting evidence, spreading false, or true, rumors. It was one of the safest and best paid jobs, doubly so when it was the church contracting them, as that meant doing holy work that would likely end in blessings. "Close enough," Chris replied, taking on a conspiring tone. "We are going to investigate the Titan's husk. The church wants to make sure it's not an actual Titan, but they are deathly afraid of confronting Izuku about it, for obvious reasons. Ancient tales about the Titans were almost forgotten by the vast majority of the population. Only the priesthood of the temple still spoke about such legends, of the enemies of the gods, destroyers of continents. There was even a theory about the mobile fortress destroyer being built to fight the Titans. All of it was bullshit, of course. "You think it really is a Titan?" Clemia asked. If it was, she guessed that hiding the truth would certainly make them look good in the eyes of the cute druid. "Of course it isn't." Chris laughed the concern off. "Do you think a Titan, even a sleeping one, would allow people to pass by him?" Do you think this town would still be here? Clemia actually laughed at the very idea, knowing that a walking, living cataclysm wouldn't differentiate between friend or foe, nor had the capacity of showing restraint and not just erase all civilization by taking just a couple of steps. Chris' laughter had been completely false though. She felt the moment the Emerald Druid touched something beyond the realm of mortals, further beyond that of heroes. The very planet had answered the call of just one person, and that wasn't possible. Then again, if Izuku was more than just some reincarnated guy, that would explain why he could do so many miracle-like things, why he could bring back the beloved. The church wasn't just afraid, it was downright terrified. The idiots may have even attempted to assassinate the boy and his party members, had it not been for her and the dreams she sent to the archbishops. The objective of this little adventure was to clarify Izuku's status, to endorse his power as divine, and to dispel all notions of heresy. By using Clemia as the sole perpetrator, she would make her look evil before the druid's eyes for desecrating his work, making it impossible for her to join his party, all while actually helping her fellow thief to get out of her problems. If Clemia fucked things up and ended up dead? Well, who was going to miss her anyway? Omake, the shamed. It was the day of departure, and Kuya was drowning in shame. When the innkeeper learned of his plans to leave her mining town for good, the large woman gave him a proposition too hard to pass. She requested a full day and night of entertainment for her and her friends, and in exchange, she would pay for him and his cute little priestess passage in a decent caravan. Lady Aqua. Kuya called as he double-checked his traveler's bag. Are you sure you aren't forgetting anything? We are not coming back. The body of the swordsmaster shuddered just by remembering that horrendous smile. The licking of lips. Doubly surely. Aqua replied, carrying only a small bag with only a handful of trinkets. I'm not going to return to this boring place ever again. For her part, Aqua was done with being treated as a slave by the stall's owner. The woman seemingly loved to scream at her for the smallest of reasons. Each time she didn't sell all the items, each time she ate something that obviously wasn't going to be sold. Good. Kuya responded, happy to know they were ready to leave. Then he turned to the driver. When can we depart? If he hadn't been a real hero, he would have erased the town from existence with his cursed sword. He almost did, in fact, but he couldn't show such behavior. What good would it do to face All Might if he carried the stigma of being a villain? He had to prove his worth, complete his task, and then everything would return to what it should be. He, at the very top, enjoying the veneration of the world, and the love of the most beautiful ladies. The mental image was instantly shattered by the memory of the innkeeper. In a couple of hours, kiddo. The driver replied, not too fazed by the eagerness of his client, I won't leave without the rest of the clients, or the escorting parties. You can go get something to eat if you want, or take a nap. Not leaving. Both shouted at the same time, clearly unwilling to set foot in the town again. Kuya wasn't a virgin boy. He could recall the girls he had been with, well, the important parts. His first experience being back home, with a girl he really liked, and who just happened to have a boyfriend with violent tendencies. To his credit, he didn't know about said boyfriend. In this world, he was able to test two fine ladies. One of which betrayed him not too long ago. Now, he feared he would be forever traumatized by accepting that deal. He just couldn't believe how atrocious his luck had turned after leaving Axel. It was like he had picked up some kind of obscenely powerful talisman of bad luck. Seriously, what were the chances of such a group of ugly ladies knowing spells to grow, male members just for the fun of it? Let's try to rest for a while. Kuya said in defeat. Not casting cleansing spells on you again. Aqua quickly bit back, if you want more, you'll have to wait until we save my cute little worshippers. Kuya quietly cursed his own luck, and wondered what he did to deserve such abuse. Chapter 21. A humble scheme. Chris the thief knew that her mission wouldn't be easy despite having a full week of preparation. Even when liberally using her influence as the goddess heiress. We are almost there. Chris announced to her entourage, 7 priests and priestesses of varying ages and ranks. I hate to repeat myself, but we cannot afford to fail, lest we tarnish the name of our beloved goddess. We understand, but, the senior priest, a handsome and young-looking high elf, replied. Just give us a few more minutes to ready our hearts. We have to, accept a harpy, after all. Taking a moment to look at the manor now in sight, Chris nodded to her entourage. No matter how desperate she was to set the plan into motion, she had to make sure that every little step was secured before proceeding. If even one of the zealots she was guiding screwed up, everything would be for nothing. For a while now, Eris had been sending prophetic dreams to key people from the church. The archbishop, all the bishops and local head priests, the most trusted freelancers working for the church, and even local celebrities that had enough influence. The beloved goddess had chosen a hero. Of humble origin and demeanor, friend to the scorned and pure of heart. His deeds would prove his worthiness, his path contradicting all notions of justice, and his voice heralding the dawn of a new era. Chris, you have met this man before. One of the priestesses called for attention while the rest muttered prayers to steel themselves. What can we expect of him and the harpy? The prophetic dreams had been vivid and rather direct. The chosen one would carry the voice of the world, making his class rather obvious. Emphasis was made on the scorned, sparing no detail on the hated harpy and the feared gator girl. Even nods to his achievements had been thrown out, like being able to redeem a lich, and of course, bringing back a fallen beloved. That Izuku managed to take down the mobile fortress destroyer just cemented the picture quite nicely. The harpy is surprisingly tame, more so considering she is a wild one. She talks and acts like a ditz, but is unerringly cunning. Don't start any aggression, of any kind. Chris' report earned grim faces from everyone, even when this wasn't the first time she'd warned them. Izuku is quite unlike anything you could expect though. He is kind to a fault to the people around him, but will retaliate with a cold fury towards anyone who even tries to harm them. This includes the harpy, and you know what happened to the destroyer. Chris took one final look at her entourage, the hand-picked group that would herald the new age of the heiress faith. To be honest, the 7 bishops had been flabbergasted at the selection process. None of them believed how 6 of their rank and file could carry such an important mission. They were not only lowly novices, but had even been marked to never advance due to their radical ideals. 3 men and 3 women, most human and only 1 male dwarf, had been ostracized due to their approach to demi-humans. The lot of them didn't even bother to hide their favoritism toward such lowly races, to the point of condemning those who abused them. All of them claimed that the beloved heiress wouldn't take delight in the suffering of any race. Their enslavement was meant to uplift them from their heretic ways, and to bring them into the light of the faith. They even declared that the harpies had long passed the point of atonement, as too many generations had perished in ignorance while paying for the sins of their ancestors. Their demands for a change of the paradigm had resulted in multiple cases of admonishment, scandal, and censorship. And now, they were the last hope of the church. Eris didn't care much though. Having to balance her divine duties and her life in the mortal world had left her with little time to pay attention to all the details. The mistreatment of the demi-humans as a whole had been a thing from her senpai, not her, although she resented such brutality being tied to her dogma. She would have liked if the harpies had gone extinct, but if forgiving them was what it took to revive her beloved race, she could be very forgiving. You think we can finally be friends with the harpies? The hopeful question was thrown in a hushed voice. I hope we can at least stand together with non-hostile terms. Once heretical words were the fountain of hope today. Oh, benevolent heiress. Give me strength to face this hurdle today. And then the prayer of the main actor of the day made Chris nervous yet again. The 6 radicals were the key to fixing the bridge between Izuku and her faith, but the elf was the central piece to bring the Avariel back. Handsome, pious, and absolutely compatible. He also used to take pleasure in torturing harpies in the name of Eris? Let's get going. The elf finally stopped praying, standing ready to bring glory to his beloved goddess. We were all blessed with this new era, and we must ensure that we accept it as our beloved Eris accepts us, even if it's difficult. Chris certainly hoped the plan would go through without issue. She also hoped she didn't need to kill this priest to prevent a mishap. Finding another compatible elf was going to be absurdly difficult. 1 minute later? Standing at the gate of the manor, Chris realized the truth behind the human saying. No plan survives first contact. Is that a freaking behemoth? The shout felt like an underreaction for the sight before the religious group. The way it was glaring at them with emerald incandescent eyes wasn't just intimidating, it would have sent them fleeing if they didn't feel like their goddess was protecting them. Even with the first snow starting to blanket the road, with the cold wind starting to make people want to avoid the outside. The creature was just there, standing menacingly as if daring everyone to even attempt to take a step into the territory where its master was resting. The antlers alone promised far more than a world of pain to anyone fool enough to challenge its might or non-existent patience. Then another couple reached the gate. My lady. I understand that I made mistakes and, the armored woman was trying to apologize to a rather annoyed-looking young lady. I gave you very specific instructions. I gave you direct orders to follow on each of the scenarios that we went through, the young blonde interrupted, the sword sheathed by her waist making her look surprisingly intimidating, and you failed at everything. You better not shame me today too. The young lady in question was not what she appeared at first glance. She had been given a very important mission, and while her unfortunate accident looked like an obstacle at first, it ended up helping said mission, if only by proxy. Slightly caressing the ring in her pocket, she mentally prepared herself for what she knew must be done. Her mission was to meet the potential heroes, souls touched by the goddesses and destined to fight against the Devil King. She was meant to judge these people, and if found worthy, offer them the incentive, a ring for betrothal. "Excuse me." A cheerful voice called for the attention of the noble lady. Looking forward, the pair noticed the group of priests and priestesses. "Are you here to seek izuku too?" Chris asked, waving her hand in a friendly manner, but still keeping her distance. "We were wondering if you knew how to pass that?" Following the pointing finger, the noble lady and her bodyguard finally noticed the first obstacle. "My lady," Claire was quick to take a step back, "we may have to rethink our visit. Maybe wait for the sage to visit the guild?" "No need." The young lady sighed as she fearlessly approached the gate. "We'll do this now, because this had been delayed beyond acceptability. Please reconsider." Claire finally got a hold of her lady, going beyond rude. Her demeanor, though, spoke of true distress. "That behemoth looks ready to trample us. This gate may be the only thing keeping us safe." There was a long sigh of exasperation coming from the noble lady, and a couple of facepalms from the group of clerics. "No, Claire," the noble lady politely started, "that is a behemoth. If it wanted us dead, we would be dead. Not even the adamantine gates of the royal palace would be able to stop it, so this flimsy gate may as well not be here for all it cares." Chris swallowed a sigh and an insult. As the goddess heiress, it was pretty clear to her that these mortals had never seen a real behemoth. Of course, the last activity from a behemoth happened thousands of years ago, when the beast woke up from its slumber and decided to walk to the other side of the continent to change its bedding. That walk destroyed 3 kingdoms and moved 5 frontiers. Nearly no one alive remembered that the holy mountain at the edge of the empire was in reality the sleeping behemoth, who had allowed dust and time to cover it in its sleep. Hopefully, it'd never wake up again. "What I asked for," Chris interrupted the pair, trying to sound as meek as possible, quite ready to throw the night girl under the guardian beast to test if it was hostile by nature, "is if you had a letter of summons, or if you had asked the owner of the mansion how to call for someone to open the gate." Chris already knew the answer. The owner was the once troublesome lich now reincarnated, and it irked her that he had retained his foul class. She wasn't like her senpai though. She wasn't going to demand his head for the sole crime of being a necromancer. She was going to try to convert him first, and if that failed, leave him alone as long as he kept away from raising undead. "No," the knight answered. "My bodyguard failed to even set a request for an audience." The noble lady added, making the knight flinch. Of course, Chris knew how to get such a request. Unfortunately, the damned necromancer would not hear a single blip from her or the clerics without kicking them out of his shop. Admittedly, that may be because certain priests had demanded his head when he first arrived. More shame on her followers, and more penance to pay. But her beloved were worth far more than that. "Why did she fail?" one of the priestesses asked. As a faithful follower of the benevolent and all-loving goddess heiress, a necromancer is just. Claire started to get into her prideful tirade, but suddenly got stomped on her foot by her lady. Agag! For someone wearing armored boots, the scream seemed to indicate an awful amount of pain. "You will bow down and apologize to that respectable man and his wife," the noble lady commanded, "and you better hope that the sage accepts your apologies as well, lest you have to explain my father why the mission failed." "Yes," the knight answered as she did her best to stand up straight, "Lady Iris." Chris' nervous laugh was seemingly taken as a reaction to the scene, rather than a preemptive celebration for the first success of the day. She knew who this noble lady was, and thus she knew that she had to do everything in her mortal frame's power to prevent her untimely demise. Addressing the duo helped immensely in buying time, which had just paid off. "Why are you lot in front of my home?" The slightly irritated male voice forced everyone to turn to the source, just to see a dark elf holding a couple bags with what appeared to be groceries. Keel the necromancer had arrived. A quick side glance gave further peace of mind to the thief, as the only probable source of animosity on her group was too busy being gobsmacked by the presence of the other arrival. The wife of the necromancer, Sasha the alchemist, looked exactly like a high elf princess of the old legends, even in her humble dress and apron combo. "Ah, good sir, if you were to spare a moment?" Iris began to take the lead. "Could it be possible to request Master Izuku for an audience?" Keel looked confused for a few seconds, but then he pieced together what was being asked of him. This was surely the noble lady that Izuku saved, partially confirmed by the presence of the rude night girl. "I can ask, sure," Keel calmly replied, knowing very well that the servant not always represented the master. "I make no promises though." "Ah, we would like to ask the same." One of Chris' group suddenly joined in, barely able to keep her voice down. "We are here to make a formal apology to the savior of the city, and to make amends for the wrongdoings of the members of this town's temple." At her words, the rest of the assembled clergy began to politely voice their own plea. It was surprisingly civil, although the necromancer didn't seem too keen on giving them any ground. We'll see what Izuku says. Sasha was the one to reply this time, although she sounded far more annoyed than her husband. 10 minutes later? Chris looked at the scene before her in stunned silence. Everything she had planned, everything she had worked really hard for, all of it reduced to this. Denied from meeting Wiz. Forbidden from going anywhere close to the Harpy. But, all right. Izuku replied after hearing the group of clerics' message, apologies, and the request for a new beginning. I accept your apologies. As agreed, and rehashed, the 6 previously heretic clerics had led the charge in the apology. Chris had banked on the fact that Izuku, being of Japanese descent, would feel inclined to a diplomatic solution. But the event had been astonishingly anticlimactic. Where the thief had expected some sort of resistance, of being berated for their unjust attack, the boy had merely allowed things to de-escalate, and opened the possibility of a friendly relationship. As long as none of your people try anything against my family, I'm happy to leave this feud behind us. Izuku's words came as soft and forgiving to the clerics, but Chris knew that they were still a warning. Was that all? Chris had to pinch her own arm to stop herself from saying something stupid, like requesting a meeting with Wiz, or suggesting he join her religion. Izuku had to be carried to the sofa in front of the fireplace to meet them. Darkness glared at them the entire time, even now serving as a bodyguard for the Verdinet. Anything could be taken as an act of aggression right now. The door opened, allowing the petite crimson demon entrance. She no longer had her arm restrained, and looked ready to go on an adventure with that odd cat resting on her head. An Axis priestess followed behind her, which turned the atmosphere tense. Healing is done. Cecily happily proclaimed, a sharp contrast to how tired she looked. Her arm is as good as new, but I'm out of mana. The blonde priestess had been healing Megumin nearly every day, which is why she was able to heal so fast from a compounded fracture. It irked Chris to no end that this zealot had been allowed to make her move before her own followers. It never occurred to her that this meeting was made possible only due to the actions of this rival priestess. Much appreciated. Izuku replied without taking his eyes away from his girlfriend, who almost shyly moved to sit by his side. Please take a bottle of wine before you leave. The clerics from Eris Church fully expected the weirdo to start the mad ravings typical to those belonging to the Axis cult. Instead, the nun-dressed girl gave a gracious nod and moved out of the room. It was shocking, to say the least. For her part, Cecily had been doing what she thought was right. Her fellow believers, those residing in this town, had heard who she was completely sure was a true champion of the beloved and caring Aqua. Since words and excuses would not heal the rift, she had made it her mission to change the archdruid's mind with her actions. She had a lengthy discourse ready for when he felt ready to listen to the holy message too. If you allow us, we would like to heal your wounds. One of the priestesses suddenly offered. Chris felt surprised and grateful for this chance. It would be the least we could do to start with the reparations. The dwarf added, nodding to himself at his idea. As the goddess Eris, Chris felt proud of her followers who showed such dedication to the goal of bringing back the Avarial. Izuku seemed surprised by the offering. He also looked reserved about accepting, surprisingly thoughtful, especially if it's free. Izuku's guarded approach was understandable as he had been exposed to the worst of their religion. The clerics back then were not shy about showcasing their greed. Chris really wanted to go into a lengthy declaration about this being pure goodwill, to show that they wanted to make things right, and that the Eris faith was changing for the better. Alas, she was just a thief, and had no way to state anything about the changes she was putting into motion. Healing you should have been the very first thing done by our peers when you saved everyone. A priestess went further, bowing her head as if she had been at fault for such a thing. Your injuries, your fatigue, such things should have been our priority since you did more for the world than all the saints we preach about. We cannot ask for anything from such a savior. Izuku tried to squeeze Megumin's hand for support. He really wanted to believe in the best of everyone. He also felt somewhat guilty for being so intolerant of the local religions. On the other hand, these psychos had actually declared their intention to mutilate his beloved Chika, and had done just that to countless harpies over many generations. His hand couldn't muster much strength though, and Megumin's cute smile was enough to melt his nerves. I think it's a good idea. Megumin suddenly conceded, I can finally move freely, and I would love for you to do the same. The coy smile sent his way made Izuku smile. The only reason he hasn't become any grumpier was because he was getting increased playtime with his girls. What little shame he still had was being quickly eroded by the pleasure of spending time with Megumin, Chika, and Liza. Being free to move his hands would mean even better playtime. Very well, I accept the offer. Izuku finally replied, earning smiles from the group of clerics, I still want you to stay away from Chika. No amount of assurances will convince me you all are honest about no longer oppressing her kind. While the clerics voiced their agreement, Chris took the entire ordeal as a big win. As she watched her followers work their healing magic on the archdruid, and recoil in horror at noticing the extent of the damage, the thief couldn't help but to recount her losses too. Despite her best efforts, Izuku completely denied her group meeting Chika or Wiz. Paranoia and overprotectiveness aside, the Verdunette had explained that they weren't pets to exhibit to an audience or animals to parade around. Her group had relented, but not without voicing their regret. They really wanted to meet a harpy and take the chance to make a good impression. The High Elf had been a bit more vocal, although he thankfully limited himself to state how much he wanted to fulfill his goddess vision of meeting and serving her beloved Avariel. Izuku had visibly frowned at that, but a quick jab to the ribs of the elven Casanova was enough to avoid an altercation. The archdruid didn't seem ready to let others seduce the Avariel, and the thief didn't want to test if the branches growing out of his head were as feeble as they looked. All in all, ending up on neutral terms seemed like the best she could hope for. From here, some subtle and open support would have to do. Once he became more open to negotiations, then bringing Wiz to the temple would be possible. "May I take this as the end of your conversation?" Iris loudly asked from her spot. She and her bodyguard had patiently waited for their turn, and while she could wait for as long as needed, she could tell that her savior was starting to get restless. "Yes," Izuku replied for the clerics, clearly wanting to return to his room sooner rather than later. "Glad to see you better, by the way." Izuku tried to be polite, he really did, but his reasoning was getting weaker, and his need to shower his girls with love was getting stronger. He was way too close to start groping Megumin's tiny breasts already. Megumin didn't really know what she wanted. She was scared of going further beyond, of finally climbing the stairs to adulthood, as her peers often said. She was also eager to tie the knot and officially claiming her rightful spot as Izuku's wife. To make things worse, she knew that the longer this visit dragged on, the higher the chances for Chika and Wiz to enter the room due to their usual antics got. Should the zealots happen to try anything on the winged pair, Izuku would most likely murder everybody, putting him in a mood poorly suited for romance. "Let me start with a proper introduction." The noble lady began as she instinctively elbowed her bodyguard, who looked just about to stand up and do something unnecessary. "My name is Iris Belzerg, the princess of the kingdom of Belzerg." The declaration froze not only Izuku, but everyone else. They were before royalty, and none knew how to act, or even react. As the princess began to explain her mission, and why she was looking for the young archdruid, Izuku began to feel a bit of apprehension. He had rudely rejected the artifacts that the knight tried to give him. Were they royal treasures? Would the princess feel offended by his intolerant actions? Would he be allowed to retire to his room to play with his girls already? Meanwhile, Clemia the thief knew a good opportunity when she saw one. After a lot of planning and researching for their joint venture, she and Chris had ironed out most of the details and preparations required for their investigation. She, of course, knew that once they started working together they would start competing to gain brownie points with the cute archdruid. Or at least that was the case yesterday. "Just a little more," Clemia muttered to herself as she climbed the Titan's husk, being especially careful to avoid damaging the foliage now covering most of the target. Careful, careful. Just that morning, a couple hours before starting, Chris had announced that an emergency job needed her expertise in a rather mandatory fashion. Apparently the higher-ups in the church demanded her to do something outrageous and she had no way to refuse. While details hadn't been given, Chris had merely suggested that she waited for either the next day, or a night raid, so they could tackle their job together. As if she would ever agree to that. Stealing the church's contract was impossible, that was Chris and no one else's. However, stealing credit was pretty much a given. Chris would get the reward and the completion mark, while she would get in Izuku's good graces for protecting his secret, or disavowing his connection to the Titans. It was a win for everyone. Especially for her. Yes. Made it. The thief quietly celebrated as she finally made it to the opening from where Izuku came out at the end of his battle. It was pitch black inside. "Now, let's take a proper look and see what's really in here." According to Chris, there could only be two possibilities. Either this was just a remnant of the cute archdruid's super wild shape, in which case the inside should be empty, or just be more wood, or, if this was a sleeping titan, a heart or core should be resting within. The contract demanded getting inside and reporting her findings. Chris of course had suggested that neither of them could be held accountable if, due to lack of experience with titans, they mistook the heart for a wooden or stone wall. "Okay, no fire." Clemia muttered to herself in an attempt to ease her nerves. She knew that any sort of fire source would be bad, so she brought a simple magic item that produced light. Time for a quick look. When the light activated, she was able to notice a couple of things. For example, the inside of the opening was quite spacious, like a room in a commoner's house. There was a well-received lack of titanic beating organ, and she wasn't alone? And so, a human is the first to arrive, an elderly voice sounded. The woman it belonged to seemed upset too. How disappointing. Quickly focusing the light forward, Clemia found the source of the voice, and then some more. The one who'd spoken was a dryad, hands and feet made of roots or branches giving her race away. However, her features were those of a really old woman. Her stance and demeanor, though, painted her as being more vigorous than a healthy adult, stronger too, considering where they were standing. Disappointing, but not unexpected. A second voice joined in, this time sounding young and prim, but carrying just as much strength as the older one. It is her trade as a thief that makes her despicable though. Changing the setting of the magic item to shed light around her instead of just forward, made it possible for the thief to notice even more details. The first dryad was dressed, and not only in a makeshift dress made with foliage as seen by those that helped Izuku, she was dressed in what appeared to be woven black silk, a one-piece dress that didn't impede her movement. It was a dress designed for elegance and modesty, rather than seduction. The hair, made of leaves as it was expected, looked muted red, like the leaves in autumn. The new one was indeed younger, mature just like Luna, but far more exuberant. While her dress was identical, her hair was an ashen tone, like leaves touched by winter, and yet strong like in the cusp of life. "What brought you here, human?" the old one asked, full of animosity. "What do you expect to gain?" The young one seconded. Under normal circumstances, this would be the point when Clemia the thief would make use of her tricks to escape and let someone else deal with the situation. Under normal circumstances, she would make a last-ditch effort to lay the blame on someone else and leave before anyone could bring up the idea of capturing her. These were no normal circumstances though. "I was sent here to search for evidence that discredits this tree." Clemia almost lost steam as she failed to give a word for the Titan's husk. Still, she carried on before things could go south, that it disproves it being a Titan or any other type of enemy of the world. In a sudden burst of intellect, Clemia avoided mentioning mankind, and just focused on the world as a whole. Dryads weren't that fond of humans so that they would never side with a Titan. So Izuku will have to deal with less bothersome people? Clemia threw out an extra reason, hoping that the Dryads would want to do some favors for the cute archdruid. Then, even a despicable being like you can be of use for him. A third voice joined, sounding like a child, yet was still regal and imposing. Focusing behind the previous two Dryads, Clemia noticed that her hunch was right. The third Dryad indeed looked like a little girl, leafy hair cascading down in vibrant green, and even the roots serving as hands and feet showed flower buds ready to open. Rather than looking at her, the childlike Dryad was focused on a wall. Said wall, however, was covered by a mass of writhing fluffy pillars. Clemia had to bit her tongue to stifle her surprise. The shout of joy would have probably ended her luck right there and then. The ugly insects were the size of a domestic cat and were mostly harmless until one man handled them, in which case the hair would turn into quill-like spikes and cause a minor rash on those afflicted by the sting. The meat was inedible, but the blood was a valuable alchemical ingredient. Additionally, the fur was actually a coveted material for insulating coats and capes, especially those used by nobles. Each one was worth 100,000 eris, and she was looking at no less than 100 of them. "Shall we really trust this lowly creature?" the young Dryad asked, helping the thief look away from the gold mine that had her attention sequestered. "Let her own mission prove her worth." The old one replied, her derisive eyes being quite clear how she expected the thief to fail. "Let's give her a chore, see if she can at least serve as a messenger." For a moment, Clemia feared that everything was going to go wrong. Her mind conjured countless tasks both dangerous and detrimental to her life just for the chance of completing her mission. She could already hear the venomous words of these. "Let's begin by giving you what you came here for, the answer to the question." The young Dryad began, catching the thief flat-footed. "This magnificent body you have stepped in, this monument to the will of the world, is not a Titan." Understandably, Clemia blinked in confusion. Taking the word of a group of Dryads as evidence would probably mean nothing before the church, but at least she could say there was no evidence of this being the Titan everyone feared. "This is no sleeping monstrosity," the old one added, snorting in obvious mockery at the pensive greenette. "It won't suddenly wake up and wreak havoc upon your settlements." "That's reassuring," Clemia answered, failing to hide her smile at the thought of her target actually being thankful for her unrequested service. "And now, for your task." The young one called to attention, just as the childlike Dryad stepped in front of the thief. In her hands, there was a cluster of knotted roots. The hollowed interior had tiny fireflies seemingly asleep. Hugging the cluster was a particularly fat fluffy pillar. Clemia was understandably baffled when both were handed to her. You will give these gifts to the one you know as Izuku, and will pass our message to his ears. The childlike dryad spoke, her commanding voice absolute. You will tell him that we hope he can visit us before leaving on his journey. That's it? Clemia asked, wondering when the hammer was going to fall on her head, or the axe on her neck. She only got nods. Okay, I can do it. With that said, the thief left, happy beyond reason at how lucky she had gotten today. It was an easy task and a perfect excuse to get near the arch-druid. Success in this would paint her as trustworthy, and no doubt help in her mission to get under Izuku's command. For such a goal, she was willing to lose any potential profit with the little bug, and was even willing to let Chris take the glory of the official mission. Little did Clemia know that the apparently worthless cluster of knotted roots was actually a Spriggan's heart, and that it was so valuable that some alchemists would not hesitate to kill a noble to get their hands on it. And as she left, the dryads couldn't help the snorts escaping their throats. A titan? The old one scoffed. It shows how pitiful these mortals are, their ignorance is almost endearing. The young one added. Perhaps it is better this way. The childlike one proposed as she returned to her dutiful watch. Not being able to recognize a nascent god may help him in his travels, after all. As she finished, the bugs moved away from the wall, revealing a core that may as well be a massive heart. Rather than an audible heartbeat, mana was visibly flowing through it, slowly and steadily traveling through the entire body. So when the time comes, our dear father will be returned to us. The three spoke as one, loving smiles adorning their faces as they all looked fondly at the living heart before them. Omake, the end of the road. Aqua and Kuya had finally reached their destiny. The gates of the town of beginners were in sight, merely at half an hour of distance, and now the sum of all the rumors they had been assaulted with through the entirety of their journey were confirmed as true. There is no way, Kuya gasped at the scene, eyes and hands trembling at the impotence he felt at that moment. Impossible. Through the entire voyage, other passengers and cart drivers shared tales about the exploits of a certain green-haired arch-druid. Tales of an ancient and powerful lich being redeemed and reincarnated, Beldia exterminated, a mighty golden tree now becoming the symbol of the city, and the last rumor, added by a caravan coming from the city of Axel no less, stating that the enemy of the world, the monster not even the Devil King dared to oppose, the mobile fortress destroyer. To hear that such an ancient foe had fallen to the Verdinet was just? Why, Aqua muttered in absolute distress. How? She had been enjoying some degree of success during the trek. Even with a black mark on her adventurer card, she could still lend her services dealing with the hordes of undead that attacked the caravan at night. No one seemed to suspect that the abnormal amount of undead was the result of her presence, and the swords master was in dire enough straits to swallow what little remained of his pride and accept the money offered for the help. She was so ready to wield these achievements to impress Izuku, to showcase her usefulness to the nerd and gain access to his no doubt gigantic fortune. She was quite ready to convince the stubborn boy to help her cute worshippers once more, even at the cost of throwing the rotten apple under the bus. Seeing the kneeling titan had changed her views and mission. Now, she needed to first make sure that her fears were just a case of paranoia. She had to make sure that such an ancient being wasn't returning to this world. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed. Support the writer. Don't forget to like, sub and share.